This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. So some breaking news for you. The television presenter Gregg Wallace's inappropriate behaviour on MasterChef, the investigation into that has concluded that more than half of the allegations against him have been substantiated, including one of unwanted physical contact. That literally dropped just as I was walking down the stairs, so I bring it to your attention early in the programme. I don't know whether we will return to it later. I can't believe quite how disgusted I was by his claims that his behaviour was somehow prompted or caused by his autism. I really felt that was gross, actually, but I didn't get around. Well, we didn't talk about it last week because I wasn't sure that there was any debate to be had. Just the sort of levels of grossness. How outraged are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Although I suppose they can make for quite diverting mornings as well, can't they? Questions like that. I don't think anybody wins any prizes for predicting this. It felt, didn't it, when we turned our attention to it last week, that the looming resident doctors' strike was going to be very unpopular. So what? I mean, when are strikes popular? Answer, rarely. But the last one was. The last resident doctors' strike, when they were still known as junior doctors, was actually quite popular. Support for it stood at, well, yeah, you got it, 52%. The infernal ratio. There were probably some don't knows. So I don't know whether the opposition to it stood at 48%. But if it was 52-48, then you could be forgiven for feeling haunted by that statistic. I know I sometimes do. What do you think it's gone down to now? This was opinion polling commissioned by The Guardian, which doesn't traditionally lean against trade unions. So what do you think it's gone down to now? It's quite a stark drop, I'll tell you that. 52% support last time, down to 26% this time. Wes Streeting due to meet representatives of the British Medical Association this week, hoping to avert 5 days of strikes that are due to start later this month. I have often said to you that I think it is just as stupid to oppose or indeed to support every strike as it is to oppose every strike. And yet, sometimes when I say that, I find myself thinking, well, hang on a minute, you generally support every strike. I don't think that I do, but it could be that my very winning little pithy adage comes back to bite me on the backside. When's the last strike you didn't support? I can't remember, to be honest with you, but I'm sure there must be strikes I haven't. As a general rule as well, when it comes to some members of the public sector, I think I got this wrong as well. Oh Lord, it's not going to be one of those weeks, is it? I'm not going to have a Catholic week, big C, where I just sort of self-flagellate and atone for all my sins on live national radio. But I don't think this works either. I used to say to you that when a teacher tells me that they need to go on strike, I trust them because I also trust them with my child's welfare. When I hand my child over to teachers, I trust them with my child's life, ultimately, and therefore when they say that they need to go on strike, I should probably trust them with that as well. And I can kind of frame the same kind of attitude to doctors. But that's not actually quite as clever as I used to think it was either, is it? Because you could be the best teacher in the world, but a bit of an idiot when it comes to industrial action. It's not really about trust. I wouldn't necessarily trust a doctor to do something that's not doctorish. So just because I trust a doctor with my health, where I'm in need of an operation, doesn't mean that I'd trust him with financial advice or go to him for holiday tips. So is that stupid? Have I dropped another clanger there? Saying to you many, many times over the years that you should trust teachers and doctors when they say they have to go on strike because you trust them with other things in completely different circumstances. Oof. Oh, I hope it's not going to be one of those weeks. It's probably the weather, actually. It's boiling all our brains, although it is, I think, set to break tomorrow. So I don't know that is quite as a zinging observation as I used to think it was. I probably still lean towards teachers a little more. But here's the thing I can't get past when it comes to the doctors. They get a 5.4% pay rise this year, which is more than almost everybody. And they got a 22% pay rise for the previous 2 years. And I fully appreciate that you can crunch the numbers in a way that leaves them some way behind where they were in 2008. A helpful phrase alert, in real terms. But the way that lands in the country at the moment, I just think is so tin-eared. I'm casting myself today as quite a passionate opponent of this industrial action. At least I am at 9 minutes past 10. You know how this works. I could get to 15:15 and I've talked myself back round again. But I can't get past the numbers. And I think that will be the question that I ask you. Is it right or wrong to just get stuck on the numbers? Not on the history or the historical disparity, but just looking at the country today and asking yourself whether or not the mooted, proposed, planned, scheduled, we got there in the end, the scheduled industrial action is something you can support. So there are two questions here, aren't there? There is my reason for not supporting it this time round, and your invitation to pick that apart and tell me why I'm wrong. And there is your reason for either supporting or not supporting. And there's also the question of why we think, whether we're part of the statistic or not, why we think public support has plummeted. And I think you can use that word. It's a slightly overused word. Is it one of those words that only ever appears in journalese, like romp? You never hear anyone talking about, I had a lovely romp this weekend. Well, it'd be a little bit inappropriate, I suppose, to share the details of my private life on the radio, had I indeed enjoyed such a thing over the course of the weekend. But I don't ever hear anyone talk about a romp. Is plummet the same? Does anything ever plummet except in headlines and news reports? I like those lists of words. We could possibly put together a few more words that only ever appear in the news language, the language of newspapers. Romp and plummet today. So I don't see how when you... And that's the other question, isn't it? Whether or not you should be basing your opinion of the doctors' strike on the bigger picture, or whether it should be solely based upon the doctor's situation. But you need to think of the patients. How many patients have had a 22% pay rise in the last few years? Answer, probably none, or next to none, unless, of course, you've got a doctor who's currently in receipt of medical treatment. And that seems to me to be quite a dangerous moment for resident doctors. To enjoy public support on the sort of scale that they did was I thought, a lovely moment. I told you I saw the Michael Sheen starring as Nye Bevan in the play Nye at the National Theatre last week, and it really brings you back to a deep and abiding love for the NHS. The way in which it was conceived and delivered against all odds by essentially the dream and vision of one extraordinary man is a play of beauty, but it's also a story of genuine beauty. And a couple of things in it really resonated with me, like, for example, doctors should be the highest paid professionals in the country. I don't know when that ceased to be true, or indeed if it ever was, but it resonates, right? Of course, if you live in a country, I mean, you know, I get paid more than most doctors. I can't really justify that. It's a commercial reality. It's the way that things go. But society decides how much doctors get paid. Markets decide how much I get paid. They're two different things. Markets don't really decide how much doctors get paid. Governments do. Societies do. Populations do. Voters do. And in a way, doctors do when they exert this kind of pressure, this kind of influence on politicians, demanding more. So I can't do it. I'm sorry, guys, but 22% over 2 years, 5.4% last year, asking again for a big rise this year when we know that the public purse is in dire straits seems to me to be wrong to the point of offensive. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me one of three things. Why I've got it right, why I've got it wrong, or why you have the opinion you have on the imminent industrial action to be taken by resident doctors. doctors. Is it simply the numbers? 52 to 26, a halving of support for this mooted strike. Is it simply down to the fact that we can crunch these numbers ourselves and we cannot muster support for an industrial action being taken over pay by people who've received eye-watering rises in recent years, and the argument that, well, yes, but if you go back 17 years, you'll see that they have actually fallen behind parity in real terms. It just isn't washing with me. And I reserve the right to swing. There's another word that you only see in tabloid journalism, but I reserve the right to let my pendulum swing this morning. And if you come up with really powerful arguments, then by 11 o'clock today, it's plausible that I will be where I usually am when industrial action is being taken by public sector workers, because they do not get the wages they deserve unless they exert pressure. And that's true of everybody from teachers and nurses who are making noises again today, but who Wes Streeting is likely to use to justify not meeting the doctor's demands. He'll say it wouldn't be fair on the other, if he hasn't already said it, he'll say it wouldn't be fair on the other members of the NHS workforce. But I can't see at the moment how you can justify this unless you're closing your eyes to the broader economic realities that the country is in. And maybe you can convince me that we should. Maybe you can convince me that we should close our eyes to the broader economic realities, and, you know, delivering Nye Bevan's dream of an extremely well-paid workforce in the NHS is something that we can prioritise over other concerns. I genuinely can't see it at the moment. You can tell by the way that I sound a bit pained. I don't like the position that I find myself in, but I'm nothing if not honest with you every day. And right now, arguments, well-rehearsed arguments notwithstanding, I can't see it. I can't get past the numbers. The number I can't get past is 22. The number I'm intrigued by is 26. 22 is the percentage pay rise they got over 2 years prior to last year. 26 is where the percentage support polling shows support for the strikes by voters has gone down to. It has halved. So what do you think? 0345 6060 973. I don't want to I'm worried lately that I've started telling you off too much, telling you what not to contribute to the programme, but I can't help the way my brain works, and I'm afraid that if you're going to get in touch with me to point out how much MPs earn, you're just going to make me yawn. It's not a helpful contribution to the conversation, is it? I posted about Stuart Lee the other day. I saw him on Saturday night at the National Theatre. If you get the chance to catch that show, just see it several times. It's so funny. It's transportingly funny. And you post how brilliant it is, and there's always someone who replies, well, I don't find him funny. And you sort of think to yourself, do you think this to yourself? Who does that? Why would you do that? So we're having a conversation about the doctors' strikes, and how much do MPs get paid? Maybe I'm a bad person, but it just makes me yawn. I don't want you to be the person that makes me yawn. So don't be that person. Answer the questions that I'm asking. I say, we're having a conversation about doctor strikes. Oh, well, let's talk about forklift truck drivers. Well, maybe I'm being unfair, perhaps. What do we reckon? Ideally, you supported it last time and you don't support it this time, because then we both become that thing that I usually warn against. If you support all the strikes, you're almost as daft as the person who supports none of them. So if you supported the last one and you don't support this one, give me a call and tell me why. It's 10:17.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Listen, if I was running the BMA, God forbid, I would understand why they are. I would possibly even be doing what they're doing. A government is vulnerable. We know, don't we, from leaked WhatsApp messages that the then leader of the BMA, when they secured their last settlement, said, give it a year, let the honeymoon period pass. I'm not quite sure it's been much of a honeymoon. Crikey, if this was a honeymoon, you'd probably be consulting the divorce lawyers already, wouldn't you, if you were Keir Starmer? But you let the honeymoon period pass and you hit them when they're vulnerable. And they're vulnerable now. But the country's vulnerable. So what is the job of the BMA? To secure the best possible settlement for its members. And that involves going on strike to get higher pay, particularly when the government is most likely to buckle or fold. But where do we sit on it? Where do the patients, the public, the voters sit on it? And I'm not alone, obviously, in having moved from support for the last round of industrial action to opposition to this one. But I don't like being against the doctors. I won't lie to you. I don't like being against the doctors. I don't know whether that's a sentimental position or a philosophical one or just a silly one, but I don't like it. Etty's in Kentish Town. Etty, what would you like to say?
Yeah, so I don't like being against the doctors either. And I was in favour last time, but I'm not really this time. And I think I find it quite uncomfortable that everything's framed, particularly this time, in terms of pay restoration to a figure which I suspect was probably the highest figure in 2008, 2009, based on how inflation's been. And actually, I think the conversation should be with the doctors and us as a country, based on the work they do and the training they've had, the debts they have, the prospects they have, the pensions they have, what is the right level of pay? Not how does it compare to 15 years ago.
Yes.
What should it be today? And last time they were talking more about working conditions, and it was a broader conversation, I think, whereas this time the argument is just pay restoration to 2008 or 9 levels. I forget which one.
Yeah, and it is a slightly arbitrary date, as we discussed last week. But if you look at, and the Financial Times is I think, pretty close to the gospel when it comes to how reliable and trustworthy such things are. The Financial Times graph shows that resident doctors have seen their income fall further and faster than almost anybody else in the public sector. Your point, if I understand it, is but that might mean that it was too high to start with.
It might do.
Yeah.
Instead of saying it's fallen or this, and I think it had fallen so much that there was an argument for pay restoration with the sort of 22% pay increase.
I can't get past that, Etty. 22%. Could you imagine getting a 22% pay rise tomorrow?
It's not an individual getting a 22% pay rise. It's whatever the entry level job is. It's the same doctor isn't being paid 30% less than they were 20 years ago. You're still getting pay rises as you progress as a doctor. It's just about what each level is as you enter the career or become more qualified, or do you see what I mean?
Of course I do. But it is going to be the thing that people can't get past is going to be it follows so fast upon the previous rise that it eclipses the historical parity argument, regardless of whether or not it was too high, too low, or just right in 2008. The idea that now, at this point in this economic cycle, you'd come fast upon a 22% pay rise and ask for more, a lot more. It's just not going to wash with many people. Another 29%, in fact, spread over several years. And then we'd be back to where we were in 2008. I mean, you can have it both ways. You can say, I approve of that, but not now. We can't afford it at this point.
And that's what I mean. It has to be part of a broader conversation. And I think, last time around, I think an entry-level doctor salary was sub £30,000. And now it's just shy of 40. Now, is that high enough? It still feels a little bit low, but I think also, again, the career prospects, the pensions, it is a relatively secure job.
Yeah, well, that's true, except that people are leaving the profession, as we know, and the statistics actually back this up. It's not like a made-up story about millionaires that everybody else in the media seemed to fall for a couple of weeks ago. Doctors really do leave the profession sometimes, but leave the country more often than other professions, and you can see why. It's a horrible job in many ways. Thank you, Etty. That's a perfect start. Addy's next, but before I introduce Addy, I just want to remind you of a call. Isn't it funny over the years we've spent together how you could never write down the algorithm for the most memorable calls? Because you'd think it would be, we spoke to someone who was in the eye of that particular storm, or we took a call from somebody who was literally living the story we were discussing. They're obviously memorable, but sometimes they come from the strangest places. I remember a call, and it's never left me this, from the auntie of a resident doctor. And she said something to me that would never have occurred to me unprompted in a billion years. And her nephew was working his second Christmas in A&E. He was working his second Christmas in A&E. And I had taken calls over the years from doctors and nurses describing to me the decline that was visited upon everybody who needs the NHS by David Cameron, George Osborne, Nick Clegg and their ludicrous austerity ideology. And it was, if you like, an unchallenged narrative. And this auntie simply said to me, so doctors would ring me and tell me what used to be the case and what was the case now, and it was hideous. And this auntie said to me, my nephew doesn't know that. This is all he's ever known. And it was a moment of such clarity that I've never forgotten it, because, of course, if you can hang on to diminishment, if you can just hold your nerve, if you like, as a politician, then it becomes, to use the phrase of the day, it becomes the new normal. So the low wages become the new normal. That wasn't about low wages. That was about overcrowding and oversubscription and too many patients turning up over Christmas at A&E and the staff not being there to deal with it because of various reasons. But it had become the new normal for him. His auntie described her nephew not knowing anything different. So he wasn't as upset by it or as angered by it as his older colleagues would have been, because they could remember the, quotes, good old days. So that's why 2008 is so interesting. It becomes the new normal, and the BMA won't let it. And now I'm talking myself back round to supporting them. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to tell me why I should or shouldn't. Addy is in Brent. Addy, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I love the new normal phrase, actually.
It's all going on.
It works with everything now, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
I won't take up too much of your time. I've just finished the night shift, so I'm pretty slow with my words.
As a resident doctor?
Yeah, yes.
How long was the shift?
It was 12 and a half hours, but this is my fifth. So I've just finished. So this is my fifth night. So I've got a day off, and then I'm back at it again. But the thing is, look, I love what I do. I think every single doctor loves what they do. They don't get into it if they don't, and certainly they won't last long if they didn't. The issue with the strike, I think, is with me. I'm stuck in a bit of a hard and a rock place, really, because yes, I completely understand the financial aspect of it. When you compare, like you really can't compare it to other professions, so the finance or the commercial sector, for example.
No.
So I think it's wrong to say, in my opinion, this person earns this much, but resident doctors only earn X amount. But when you compare it to sort of other developed countries, it's significantly lower.
Is it?
And I think since I last spoke with yourself, two more of my friends have actually gone off to Australia, and one is we're having a leaving party that I've actually had to organise swaps to try.
We spoke during the last round of industrial action, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So it's an issue.
And is it the money? Is it the money, Addy? Would your friend not be going to Australia if the wages were, if parity with 2008 wages were achieved?
So I believe it's a massive factor, essentially, because this is. So I'll give you. It's the work-life balance that also comes with it. So a 9 to 5 in Australia, for example, would get you almost double the salary that you get here.
Really?
Fine. But the issue is that we typically work extra and sort of an hour, perhaps 2 hours if somebody's critically unwell, for example. If this happens in Australia, you get sort of double pay. And in fact, you're actively encouraged by about 4:45, 4:50 to sort of make sure you're on the way out. So it's almost all the British doctors who say, no, you know what, we don't mind staying a bit longer because we'll actually get paid for it. But it comes back to, for me, the working conditions, but also just the additional expenses. I mean, every profession has additional expenses attached to it, examination, etc. But there's a lot more that you do have to fork out in the earlier on.
But for your generation, I mean, this is why that little line there about the auntie and the nephew on A&E over Christmas stayed with me for so long. Because for your peer group, you were signing up for the diminished status. You knew what you were signing up when you became a junior doctor. I don't imagine when you went to medical school. I don't imagine that the salary you'd receive upon graduation was in the very, very forefront of your thinking. But the idea that there's sort of cohorts of resident doctors who joined the profession fully intending to seek parity later is clearly not true, is it?
No, absolutely. I mean, when you go into it and you get your first paycheck, you think, oh, this is brilliant. Right. And then you get your next paycheck and then you have to think about, okay, I need to pay for fees. I have to do an examination. So, for example, the next part of my training, mandatory, I have to fork out another 600 quid just to be just to have something on portfolios. I
hear you. And so you are. Did you vote for strike action? Do you mind me asking that? You don't have to tell me. It's a secret ballot.
No, I didn't vote for strike action. I thought it. I mean, again, I'm in between.
Okay.
Two sides,
so
really.
Yeah, no, I get that, and you've explained it pretty well. I only say pretty well because you've obviously been up all night, so I don't know what you'd sound like if you were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. So I want to leave some room for improvements in your levels of articulacy. But the final question is simply my slightly lazy but sincere and authentic position, which is I think you should be paid more, but not now.
I mean, I think if there's a way that they're able to put a plan in place to sort of work on that, then certainly. I mean, come on, I don't think anybody can think, tomorrow we'll wake up and get 30% extra.
No, it's an opening. It's an opening gambit, and we'll see what happens between your representatives and Wes Streeting. Do you have any idea what your hourly rate was for the 12.5-hour shift that you've just done off the top of your head?
I think off the top of my head it was 19 an hour.
£19 an hour.
Yeah.
For a 12.5-hour shift.
Yeah.
In intensive care, I think.
Yes.
Oh, there goes my pendulum, man. What are you doing to me?
But look, I love it. I love it.
I know you do, but £19 an hour, there'll be people listening to this getting more than that for doing things that they would concede are probably not quite as important or as difficult or as expertise-driven as working overnight in intensive care. Thank you, mate. Go and get some sleep, seriously. It's 10:31, and I told you this would happen, didn't I? Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:34 is the time, and if we're quiet for a moment, you can hear the sound of pendulum swinging. So, we talked to Addy, and I don't think I've spoken to him since the last round of junior doctors then, industrial action, resident doctors now, and you could hear how torn he was and how knackered. And then he tells you that, give or take, he's on about 19 quid an hour for the 12.5-hour shift that he's just done on an intensive care ward. And you're now getting in touch with me. I like this from John, who writes, haha, mine changed also just like that. And, of course, I'm also getting messages like this from Tracy. I'm a cleaner, she writes, and I'm on £20 an hour. I don't work weekends or nights. And I could fill my inbox up now with people on more than Addy, but he's probably got a better pension than you, or at least a better pension provision, and his pay will go up when he completes his residencies and becomes a consultant. But that's not really the point, is it? That this is where the BMA are coming from. They don't feel that resident doctors should be on, a shy of or around about £20 an hour for working as doctors, and I don't think I can disagree with them. And yet I can still just about muster up the argument that if you got 22% a couple of years ago, 5% last year, 5.4% last year, you should just sit tight for a while before you come back for more. And then you turn into the nephew, for whom it is now normal. You turn into the nephew who's never known it to be any better in the NHS because he's only been in the job for 2 years. So the diminished service or the diminished wage or the overcrowding, the oversubscription, the understaffing, all of those things eventually become the boiled frog. They become normal. And that, I think, is what the BMA is trying to resist. And now I'm doing a good job of making their case for them, having started the show convinced that they were on a hiding to nothing here. I wonder how many people, if you could get the whole country to listen to this radio programme, I wonder how many people in the space of that one phone call felt their position shift. I don't know. Davey writes, it stops me in my, quotes, mind's made up, this strike is bad, end quotes, tracks, when we hear callers like that, James. I am so torn with this one. And yet the 22%, I don't know. Michelle's in Dundee. Michelle, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I think my pendulum was swinging very far the other way as well when Addy was on the call.
Yes.
However, I still think, we all want our doctors to be well paid. We want them to be motivated, and we want them to have a good standard of life because they've worked hard for it. That's no argument about that.
And because of the value, the social value that society puts on that particular line of work. I mean, it puts them in a different category from lots of other people who work and train very, very hard, but don't end up contributing quite as much to the public good.
Precisely. We need them. But I think last time round, in the last strike, we all supported them because we could see, the pay hasn't been degraded over the years, and a 22% increase was good, 5% the next year, so a total of 27, probably more compounded over 2 years is actually really good. And we all felt that's great, they deserve it. But to come back now and ask for another huge pay rise in that short space of time, this is the reason why people are probably feeling pretty, minds change. Because if I look, I work in a professional job. I've done professional qualifications. I've worked hard and all that stuff. My pay's been degraded significantly over the last 8 or 9 years. Almost everybody in the UK has had their pay degraded over the last, 8 or 9 years, or probably more. Pay rises of 2 or 3%, and inflation's at nearer 10%. So all of our standard of living has dropped. And then the question becomes, well, why should it not drop for the doctors when everyone else has dropped?
You could frame it the other way, which is to say that if we had, or if everybody else had the recourse to the sort of industrial action or leverage that the doctors have, then they would do it too. So we're punishing them or withdrawing our support for them out of a form of envy almost.
Well, it is a form of envy, but it's a reality as well, because the fact is, as a country, we can't afford to restore their pay back to what it was in 2008 or 2009. It's just not possible at the moment. And I think that's why they're being a bit kind of cloth-eared, because I think when it was all about conditions and all the other stuff, everybody supported them. Now it's purely about money, and everybody feels the pain at the moment. We all don't have much money left over at the end of the month, if any.
Yeah, I hear all of that, but then we just heard from a man who's completed 12 and a half hours on an intensive care ward, and he's on £19 an hour.
Yeah, which is ridiculous. I totally agree.
We're doing a lot of cognitive dissonance today, you and me, I think, aren't we?
Yes. But then,
and of course we can afford it. If Australia can afford it, we can afford it. We can afford it. What does that even mean? I can afford it. We can do this. We can do that. I'll get a message in a minute saying, stop giving all the money to the immigrants, and they'll think we can afford it by doing that. But they'll be very, very busy in Idiot's Corner this morning.
There's the mentality, and people won't see it any other way, is that we are being asked to subsidise a pay rise for them when we're struggling ourselves. So our taxes must go up to support them.
Oh, that's an interesting
point. We get even less.
Yeah, no, it goes hand in hand. Goes hand in hand. The idea that our taxes will go up. I mean, doctors literally do get paid out of the public purse, so that may change the view of people. And yet they were in favour of the 29% settlement. I beg your pardon, the 22% settlement that was handed down just a couple of years ago. 20 minutes to 11 is the time. It's not about backing or opposing strikes rights, no hostages. It's about backing workers' right to decide for themselves. If they say they're underpaid or unsafe or being treated unfairly, we should listen. They are best placed to judge, which is a neat distillation of where I often find myself on these matters. But I'm afraid that on this occasion, I can't get the 22% pay rise out of my rearview mirror. You're going to have to try harder to make me understand why I should, and indeed other callers as well. Why should I remove that 22% from my rearview mirror when we are all in it together? Oh, God, I just sounded like David Cameron. I can only apologise passionately. And you think I make it up when I tell you what will be happening in Idiot's Corner. Here is a message from Anna, who's in Hampshire, sadly stuck in the car with LBC again. A poor woman doesn't know how to operate her own radio. I mean, crikey, maybe it's a bit unfair to put her in Idiot's Corner. But here you go. Next time you Liberals want open borders destroying my country, think about why the UK is too skint to pay its doctors properly. And then she's written in capital letters, but stop, can't you pluck some of those doctors arriving in dinghies, James? Well, of course, there are doctors who come here via refugee routes, including quite a good friend of mine, but they're not allowed to work as doctors until their asylum application has been fully processed. But you do you, Anna. Maybe ask a friend to teach you how your radio works, and then we can spare you the horrors of listening to informed people talking about things like grown-ups. Karen is in Kingston. Don't spoil it, Karen. Sound like a grown-up.
Hi, very
Hello.
briefly, I'll try. I'm a doctor's mum, a bit grown-up, but briefly, so you talked about cognitive dissonance. It's so interesting. Everybody's hooked on this 22% figure as being outrageous, etc. But when you talk to them about £19 per hour, they all think it's shocking.
I know. Numbers, Numbers.
Numbers, hey. I mean, how much does anybody listening pay to get their nails done? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. The one thing I'd say
nothing,
is
personally,
warning, I know, you take the point. Look with horror at the dentists. This is part, I have absolutely no doubt, of the way the media and everybody are sort of raining down on this 22% without mentioning the £19 an hour. It's part of the plan, I think, to just collapse the NHS by stealth, and they are going to end up. The reason their pay is so low is they're part of a monopoly, pretty much a monopoly in this country. Outside the NHS, I think we all agree, at private hospitals or anywhere in the Western world, they'd be paid a fortune. And they're sick of it. They're absolutely sick, not just of the money, but the way they're treated and gaslighted by government. Hospitals, they've got nowhere to sit to do their notes. Terrible conditions.
I don't want to have a fight. Hang on a minute. There's no way a Labour government wants to run down the NHS.
I don't believe that. I'm sorry, have you looked at the register of people who've got interest in private?
Of course I have. And they want... The two things that happily coexist. There's no earthly way that a Labour government would give a 22% pay rise to doctors 2 years ago if they were in the business of trying to chase doctors out of the NHS.
I think they can't be seen, and I totally agree that ideologically they don't want to, but they also recognise, like the benefits, that they can't afford to sustain it. So that comes down to who's going to pay the cost of it being run down, and the target is always the staff who are still there.
You can't keep this. You can't sustain this position with the 22% in the rearview mirror. You just can't.
James, can I talk about £19 per hour?
No, of course you can. No, well, you can and you can't. You can and you can't, because we've done both, and £19 an hour is obviously not enough.
Isn't it?
But it needs to go up. The argument today is that it can't go up yet.
Okay, so we're at a stalemate. I think you're sort of suggesting in terms of what the country can afford, and I think the bottom line is, if the UK is saying the people who have to bear the brunt of what they can afford are the most highly trained professionals in the country, I would argue. I'm a solicitor, I've got a good comparison.
Fair enough.
Then the public sector cannot continue to employ them, and it won't, because they will vote with their feet. Apart from let's not even get on to the fact that there's no jobs out there, and they are very job insecure with these massive debts and training expenses. It's not the trust and the contract between the NHS, which relied on a lot of goodwill, has gone.
And restoring that should be the priority of any government, especially a Labour government, or indeed any government that cares about the NHS. And
I was talking to another doctor's mum whose daughter got married as a doctor about a year ago. No, she's a friend.
Doctor's mums.
Her daughter had booked off her own wedding months in advance, and then she got rostered with a night duty the night before, because that's how they are dealt with, and she had to get her own replacement so she could go to her own wedding. This is a story you hear all the time, because there's no joined up care for their working conditions. It's a very odd situation being a doctor in the NHS. The trusts don't care, they don't particularly like you, and the training's gone to pot. You're sent all over the country at the drop of a hat, whether you've got kids, aged parents or whatever. You've just got no trust in the people who are employing you anymore.
And you don't. I mean, is that it then? Is that the stalemate?
I think we've reached breaking point.
Well, £19 an hour versus 22%. Never the twain shall meet. Because that's why we can laugh. Melissa and I laugh about cognitive dissonance. You can't, because it's your boy that we're talking about. And you can say simultaneously that £19 an hour isn't enough, but you can't have a big pay rise because you got 22% last year.
I'm a passionate believer in the NHS. My family have all worked in it. I'm a volunteer in a healthcare setting. My sister was a nurse, etc., etc. But there comes a point. My brother was a policeman who then worked, driving doctors around. Yeah. We are grounded in the NHS. But we're not
and if we
there
don't
as
look after it
taxis
better,
to take the sharp end of political decisions anymore.
And that is an incredibly powerful contribution, actually, and a reminder of the bigger picture and the antidote, if you like, to the normalisation of unfairness, which is what worries me, actually. The idea that new cohorts, new generations, Karen's son among them, will eventually lose sight of where they would be if parity had been maintained, if we hadn't had 14 years of pretty stringent cuts, starting, of course, at a point where patient satisfaction in the NHS was the highest it had been in history in 2010. Spoiler alert, it isn't now. Thank you, Karen. That pendulum. Stop talking about my pendulum swinging. What if you've just tuned in? You might think it's a bit indecent.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:50 is the time. A couple of clarifications on my own comments this morning. The 22% rise was agreed last year. It was after Labour got into power, but it was agreed for the previous 2 years. So I've said a couple of times that it was done 2 years ago, which is incorrect. So my apologies for that. That is what actually happened. 22% rise agreed for the previous 2 years. 5.4% pay rise this year, 22% for the previous 2 years. And quite a lot of you have pointed out that a lot of that would be eaten up by inflation anyway, and that's what parity is about. Bringing it back to 2008 levels means how much money you would have in the context of the cost of living and in relation to inflation. But as Karen reminds us, you talk about a 22% pay rise and everybody gets on their high horse, and 26% support from the public, down from 52 last time round. If you talk about what that means in real terms, on a hourly wage of £19 an hour, which almost everybody agrees is an unfair pittance. 10:51 is the time. David's next, but before that, not too long, but a little longer than average, this thread of messages sent to me on Blue Sky. I studied medicine after a BSc and an MSc, both in biology and medicine adjacent subjects. On qualification, I was paid for an average 40-hour week. Invariably, it was never that. Routinely, I'd come in for 8 a.m. and never leave much before 6 or 7 Monday to Friday. Most weeks would include at least one late shift during the week, and there'd also have been a weekend on call 1 in 4 weeks. The point here is that no doctor works a 40-hour week. There was always unpaid overtime, lots of it. There was an attempt to address this with a guardian of safe working and exception reporting. Unfortunately, this was difficult at the start, as many doctors feared reprisal from senior staff or management when these hours were claimed. So you learn to grin and bear it, to just get on with it. The grueling hours, the working environment took its toll, but I persevered. To progress in your medical career, there are a number of things you need to do outside your typical working week. Audits, courses, presentations, study for postgraduate exams. All this is done on your own time and paid for out of your post-tax salary. So over the course of my training, I've spent about £2,000 a year of my own money just to do the things I need to do to make myself competitive. You don't do these things, you can't progress. Then there are the fees we pay for the privilege of being a doctor. Indemnity, GMC, Royal College fees, BMA subs, and any other relevant societies. Again, all post-tax. I love my job. I love that I work in a profession that allows me to make a real change in people's lives for the better, but I do not think I would recommend this career as it currently is in the UK to any aspiring young person. As doctors, we give the best years of our lives training and working in the health service. Long hours, long days, long nights. I can't even begin to count the number of birthdays, funerals, weddings of friends I've had to miss over the years because of this job. Many times there is a service need and leave will not be approved. As time goes on, we continue to sacrifice our youth, our mental health, our happiness on the altar of this profession. And it goes on. In fact, it ends 4 or 5 messages later with the line, sorry for the word salad. Sorry for the word salad. Emphasis is important. I will stop rambling. No, you're not rambling, and you've made some really powerful points, and I can tell that it's almost like a venting, an unshackling of what you've been dealing with and what you've been feeling, and I can't argue with any of it. And yet, I can't get the 22% out of the rearview mirror. And probably, I think we'd agree now that we should try a bit harder to do so. David is in Preston. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
I have completed my medical training, so I've done my years as a resident.
Okay.
I'll be starting as a consultant in the next few months. As such, I didn't vote on this ballot, but I do support the residents striking. I think there needs to be a bit more clarity about what's being asked for. So we're still asking for, I say we, they're still asking for return to pay in line with RPI inflation from 2008 up to now. And if you look at, as you've already alluded to, the graphs of all professions in relation to inflation over the last sort of 17 years or whatever it is, doctors have been punished by far the most. And while you are talking about £19 an hour or 22%, I actually think it's a lot more simple than that. You've got a group of professionals who've agreed amongst themselves as part of a union that they're not adequately remunerated for the work, effort, time that they put into their job, and they've agreed to strike. The timing of it, people ask me about this all the time, the timing of it, I think, is actually most crucial to do now, because the health care system in this country is currently on life support. You wouldn't know it reading the headlines. They don't want you to know it, but actually it's in dire straits. You've got a doctor crisis, as in number of doctors available to sort of work the service on the horizon, and the long-term review from the NHS is actually putting more non-professional, non-medical professionals in positions of medical decision-making. So you've got your advanced nurse practitioners, your physician's associates, and it's going to be deprofessionalised. Your senior clinician will not have gone to medical school in 5-10 years' time. That may not be as obvious a problem as it will be to every listener now, but actually, trust me when I say this, you want doctors in charge of medical decision-making.
The BMA dropping the ball a bit on that then? I mean, if you honestly believe that the general public is not aware of the peril that the NHS is in, my profession notwithstanding, whose fault is that?
So I think it's difficult to fight on two fronts at the moment. The BMA rightly has to focus its efforts on strike organisation and maintaining that mandate for as long as necessary. I don't think they're incorrect in making that decision either. But that is the backdrop narrative to it from my side and from every other doctor I work with. We know why we're trying to attract people into this profession. We know why we're trying to keep people in this country who are already working this profession, and why that's of value. And that will hopefully feed across to the general public at some point, maybe as part of the BMA's campaign. I don't know, but it really is an important point.
It is an important point. Is there any mileage in the pensions argument? Wes Streeting suggesting that if they make the pension a bit less generous, they might be able to provide a bit more pay in the now.
Yeah. So the real problem with the pension is the fact that it's linked to the state age, which is a moving target. That's new as of the 2015 pension sort of revision. Most doctors don't want to, and probably shouldn't be, working to the age of 67, 68, right. I think it is now. You don't, trust me when I say this as someone in intensive care, you do not want a 60-year-old man being called out of bed at 2 a.m. to come and deliver life-saving treatment to you or your loved one. You just don't want it. The mental agility is not there for someone of that age. There'll be some people who object to that, and as someone who's a lot closer to that age than you are, I might be one of them. But I take your central point. I do understand there are some jobs that are more taxing and more demanding than others, and medicine would be very near the top of that particular tree. You don't have to answer this question because it's a bit personal. But what difference is made to your finances at the moment that you become a consultant compared to the last pay packet as a resident? So I'm deliberately having to not work as much as I potentially could as a consultant, because it will take me over the £100,000, which is a lot of money. I'm not skipping over that point. £100,000 adjusted net income threshold, where you lose your childcare hours. So I've got 2 young kids. Both of them benefit from the 30 hours per week childcare, and I would be significantly lose out if I went over that threshold. To make to come good again, to balance it out, I would have to earn £156,000, which is probably not achievable on the current consultant pay scale, to be honest.
No, fine.
And not realistic at all during my working lifetime. So I go from about £80,000 to just shy of 100. For going from finishing my training as a resident to starting as a consultant. Okay.
And that's another conversation for another day, the bonkersness of thresholds. We talk about it often, don't we, on the programme? The fact that someone on just vanishingly close to being over it, but just under it, and vice versa, appear to make a mockery of the entire system, but what the alternatives are, we can never work out. David, good luck in the new role, and thank you for that. It is a question of swing, I suppose. I suspect many people like me are either clinging to their cognitive dissonance, holding two conflicting thoughts in your head at the same time, or you've shifted position entirely, or you were supportive of the junior doctors to start with and you still are. The person I don't think exists, Idiot's Corner notwithstanding, would be the person who began this hour thinking that the junior doctors were right to strike and has now ended it thinking that they would be wrong to strike. I don't think that we served you much to munch on in the course of the last hour. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think that the breaking news regarding the television presenter Gregg Wallace merits a little bit more attention, because I found the claims that he has put into the public space regarding his behaviour utterly offensive. The problem is that I'm not autistic. At least as far as I'm aware, I'm not autistic. We're all on the spectrum, I suppose, aren't we, in various ways, but I don't think that I make the lights flash or the bells ring. And so, do you see what I mean? Do you see about the difficulty of this? The original offence is authentic. My offence, my sense of offence on behalf of autistic people, when somebody claims that the reason why they have engaged in deeply unpleasant behaviour, and a majority, over half of the claims, there were 83 allegations, 45 have been substantiated, mostly involving inappropriate sexual language and humour. There was one case of unwanted physical contact. There was more than one case of being in a state of undress, and there were several cases of inappropriate language. We may run through a little bit more of the detail imminently. But the claim that he couldn't wear underpants because he had autistic hypersensitivity struck me as outstanding in its crassness. So the allegation was that he would expose his genitals to people because and the defence was that he couldn't wear underwear. So unless I'm missing something fairly hefty here, you don't take your trousers off. It's pretty easy to avoid exposing yourself to somebody, particularly if you don't wear underwear, by keeping your trousers on at all times. I've worked in television, and I'm just trying to think of whether or not there have ever been any circumstances whatsoever in which I had to take my trousers off in front of people who didn't want me to take my trousers off. And the answer is no. So you work with wardrobe people, and they may, come into your dressing room and give you your suit that you're going to wear, and you may take your trousers off, or you may be in your undercrackers. But the ease with which you could say, I'm not wearing any undercrackers. You might want to leave. Would you mind leaving? I mean, I wouldn't want you to see me, would I? That's the point. That's exactly the point at which you sit in judgment on behaviours like this. That idea that you have no choice but to expose yourself to somebody because you can't wear underwear due to what they describe as autistic hypersensitivity. But I'm not autistic, so is it even vaguely feasible that his autism would be a rationale for the two things that are on the table here? The first is an inability to wear underwear because of his autistic hypersensitivity to labels and tight clothing. Even if that were a thing, even if that were true, then you would just not put yourself in a situation ever where you were going to remove your trousers, right? And then the second bit is that your autism, he argues, makes him unaware of his autism spectrum disorder, which he was diagnosed with while the investigation was underway, meaning that he couldn't read social cues and would use humour as a masking technique. He accepts that his diagnosis may help to explain some of his actions, but he does not wish to hide behind it, the report said. I'd say that story had moved along a little bit when the details of this investigation reached the public a little earlier. So I think it's a morning for an explanation of what autism can do in the context of of inappropriate behaviour, and whether or not I am right to be profoundly offended by the claim that the two events are linked, by the idea that being autistic can somehow prompt you to behave in really creepy and inappropriate ways. And the number you need to join in with this conversation is 0345 6060973. A litany of complaints upheld against the 60-year-old man. The report is published this morning. The inquiry was carried out by a law firm called Lewis Silkin for the production company Banijay, which makes MasterChef. We discovered last week that he would not be returning to that programme. Most of the alleged incidents occurred between 2005 and 2018. 94% of the allegations fall within that time period, and only one allegation was substantiated post-2018. While many described Wallace as energetic and humorous on set, the same traits sometimes led to comments or interactions that made people feel uncomfortable, especially in pressured or public filming environments. While his comments were sometimes met with laughter, they were only occasionally challenged at the time, the report found. So, as somebody diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, how feasible do you think it is that this man could have had no inkling of how unpleasant and inappropriate his behaviour was? And that's a genuine question, because I don't want to do a conversation that essentially says, on a scale of 1 to 10, how outraged are you by this behaviour or by this defence? That's what I want to know. How feasible is it? How plausible is it that having an autism spectrum diagnosis, autism spectrum disorder diagnosis, can actually explain behaviours that other people would consider to be inappropriate or profoundly wrong? Unpleasant, inappropriate or profoundly wrong. That's what we don't know, okay? 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. Please be careful, writes John. Saying that we're all on the spectrum can sometimes be used by less sympathetic parties to attack those who have real needs, even if they are misunderstood. Thank you for the heads up on that, John. I think it's probably a phrase I won't use again in that case. The claims made by Gregg Wallace appear to be incredible and to not recognise that he had responsibility to behave in an acceptable fashion. However, and it really does make me groan to say this, there are real subconditions here that could be at play. I wouldn't accept his claim that he had to remove his trousers or his pants, but I do have a hypersensitivity at certain times of the year that make my legs so painful it's like they're being stabbed with 1,000 needles. For me, I wear something thin and light to minimise contact with my skin to try and ease that sensation. It might be psychosomatic, I'm not sure, but it has been something incredibly difficult to deal with. So I get that, but equally, if you're not wearing underpants, you don't take your trousers off in the presence of anybody. There is no... and I don't want to keep saying I've worked in television. It doesn't matter what you're working in. There is absolutely no circumstance whatsoever, with the possible exception of professional sports people, where you should see a colleague's genitals, ever. And the claim that somehow being autistic means you wouldn't realise that, or being autistic means you wouldn't fully appreciate that, seems to me to be, at the very least, questionable, and at the worst, deeply, deeply offensive. And that's really what I want to talk about today, whether or not, what it's like, because whether he's being completely honest or not, that message there from John highlights the fact that most of us will not know what role this kind of condition can play in behaviours, and it might actually end up making us more understanding. It could be a silver lining given the findings of this investigation. So if you're just joining us, a report into Gregg Wallace's alleged inappropriate behaviour has been published this morning. The TV host has already been sacked as a MasterChef presenter, and the law firm carried out the investigation on behalf of the production company behind MasterChef. The allegations against him have been largely substantiated, 45 out of 83. Inappropriate sexual language and humour, one case of unwanted physical contact, and we know that some colleagues had reported also that he had exposed himself to them in dressing rooms and the like. So I want you to tell me, because you have more experience of this than I do, whether or not there is any argument, any defence or explanation as opposed to excuse that is linked to an autism diagnosis, that your inability to read social cues or your difficulty in understanding other people's perspectives is something that should actually be taken into account. Investigators noted that it could be highly relevant. He hadn't got a diagnosis until the investigation was underway, but I don't think that is something that you hold against somebody. If you are being told that your behaviour, and you hadn't previously realised, is offensive or unpleasant, then and you genuinely didn't realise, then you might seek an explanation as to how you could have had such difficulty in reading social cues and using humour as a masking technique. I don't know what that means either. The idea that you are you think that that's how everybody else thinks and behaves, so even though it feels inauthentic to you, that is how you will think and behave. Elise points out, OMG, she writes, I've tuned in at quite a time. As an autistic person, we might well miss clues and get things wrong. However, once something has been pointed out, we are perfectly capable of learning from our mistakes like anybody else. I hate it when low support ASD folks use their autism as an excuse for their bad behaviour. And just for the record, I completely withdraw my statement that we're all on the spectrum in some way. I had no idea that it was a difficult thing to say, a wrong thing to say. As Janie points out, I too have to wear loose-fitting clothes due to the burning pain that is felt on contact. I'm autistic and I deal with it without offending anyone. So that's what I want to know, a little bit more about the relationship between autism and behaviour that everybody else considers to be inappropriate. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. I'm also, I think, inviting you as someone with autism to tell me how you feel about it being used as we talk often about the perforated line, don't we, between excuse and explanation, and how you feel, like Elise, as someone with autism, someone who is autistic, how you feel about the condition being used as an explanation stroke excuse for behaviour that most people could immediately identify as inappropriate and or unacceptable. All right? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's 11:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:16 is the time. Well, you live and learn. Corpsey, one of my longest standing correspondents, has been in touch with some insights into the relationship between hypersensitivity and sensory issues and autism, bringing a company to my attention that specialises in seam-free undergarments. And there are quite a few people listening to this who recognise that the hypersensitivity associated with certain clothing can be deeply, deeply debilitating. If you're in autistic circles, writes Corpsey, you will often end up in a conversation about good spoons and non-evil clothing. So the spoon is about feel, is it, in your hand? The idea of something feeling right or wrong and therefore needing a certain type. My experience of autistic inability to notice social cues, James, generally errs to the not realising you're in a relationship until your first anniversary. So I'm interested in learning more about these relationships between autism and hypersensitivity and other things, but I'm also interested in how you as an autistic person feel. And please feel free to police my language and my tone to your heart's content. Every day's a school day. I'm also interested in how you feel about this man using his autism diagnosis to explain and or excuse his inappropriate behaviour. 11:18 is the time. Henry is in Birmingham. Henry, what would you like to say?
Hi, you're right. Yeah, I just wanted to add some topics on like what's happening with this Gregg situation, really, because I'm a working professional with autism as well in the tech industry.
Right.
And I wouldn't be revealing myself like he would, to be honest, like in the ways he does, really, to be honest.
No, and I mean, the linking of the two, the idea that his inability to appreciate how unacceptable certain behaviours were being linked to his autism it's not helpful to people like you, really.
No, and I think the original purpose of him was to be brought on as like this kind of cheeky, chappy kind of type, but
yes.
how he's like warped this into this like all the comments he makes and stuff like. I mean, you can see it kind of like sometimes they do make your eyebrow ruffle a bit, don't they?
Well, what are you like, if you don't mind me asking? Do you sometimes? I mean, do people ever take you to one side and tell you that something that you're doing or something that you're saying is not really quite right? Do you struggle with social cues ever?
I do in like some ways, but in like the work context, I mean, I can understand where he uses like humour as a mask.
Yes.
Like,
what does that mean? Help me understand what that means, Henry, if you can.
So in terms of like social stuff, so for autistic people, it can be kind of stressful. So it's not like a kind of, you could go talk to someone and you'd have like a good time. Really, you have to almost engineer how you say stuff in a way.
Yes. But
this kind of like cheeky chappy kind of archetype humour as a mask is you're almost entertaining yourself to make conversations a bit more, bearable, if you get what I mean.
I think I get what you mean. I saw something, I think it was in a film. You know when you get stuff in your memory and you can't quite remember where it came from? I've got one of those moments, and it was heartbreaking. It was a little boy who memorised, I think, a Monty Python sketch because he didn't really get comedy, and he thought if he could memorise a whole Monty Python sketch and then just recite it verbatim, then he would be funny because he knew people found this funny, and there was something heartbreaking about that disconnect, really, and that's masking, is it, of a kind? That's attempting to fit into a world you don't really know how to fit into.
That's exactly it, yeah. So, like current trends, you'd memorise those and you'd say them just to kind of, fit in that kind of thing. I mean, a lot of, like, what's going on now, like, with Trump and stuff, a lot of, like, masking is kinds of, this is how you, like, those kinds of mannerisms, his hands. Like, a lot of people universally find that quite funny, really. So, I think doing that...
It must be exhausting. Sometimes.
Yeah. I think, as you were mentioning earlier with spoons, like this is kind of like the energy currency for an autist. So you only have a certain amount in a day, I would say, and if you run out, this is when you almost flatline, like completely. I want to shut away. I don't want to talk to anyone almost. So.
Gosh, yes, of course. And that's impossible for me to properly understand, isn't it? I can never walk a mile in those shoes.
But, yeah, I think bringing it back to Gregg, though, he does have some points with it. Like, he might have been goaded on by the BBC or like his situation, but he would know from right or wrong. Like,
you would think so,
and going too far.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, quite a lot of people. If you were reading my inbox today without knowing what the subject was, you'd be a little bit confused by the number of people getting in touch to tell me the details of their undergarments, what they can and can't wear. Who even knew that seamless undergarments? It's from a film called X Plus Y. Mark reminds me, and it's the entire Dead Parrot sketch, and it is utterly. Even thinking of it now brings sort of a metaphorical tear to my eye because it is a moment of such extraordinary, I would say beauty, but it's pathos, it's heartbreak. Thank you, Henry. Chris has been in touch. I love you, he writes, but there you go. That's how to get your message read out, even if it's slightly critical. To understand your question about Gregg Wallace really needs a lived experience from someone who is autistic. Well, respectfully, Chris, that's what I'm trying to do. I am 56 and was diagnosed high-functioning autistic at 52. Autism is not an excuse for inappropriate poor behaviour, but we do have issues understanding how neurotypicals communicate and consequently with boundaries. I've been plagued throughout my life with accusations of inappropriate behaviour. I do not use my autism as an excuse, but in order to fit in and to be liked, I've always tried humour to be like everyone else. The problem comes from not understanding the social cues or where the lines and boundaries are. It gets very confusing that something near the edge is hilarious and something over the edge is wrong. It's like Data. It's a bit like Data from Star Trek Next Generation, learning humour. It's very complicated for us to understand when funny crosses into offence until it's too late. We are all capable of learning social cues, but I still get this wrong, and it's difficult to socialise well. As a consequence of getting it so catastrophically wrong in the past, I now avoid most people and all social gatherings, which is safer, but lonely and isolating. I simply don't know how to get on with neurotypicals, so I stay out of the way, as the rejection is more painful than the loneliness. Chris, I'm so sorry to read that. I really am. And I mean, it's not much consolation to you, but thank you for explaining and articulating that experience so clearly. What you don't add, and there's no reason why you should have done, but it's part of the phone-in, so I'll mention it, is whether or not you have any sympathy for the explanation stroke excuse offered up by Gregg Wallace in this case, because as you've said yourself, you've sometimes crossed the line that you couldn't even see and you don't really understand the existence of. 24 minutes after 11 is the time. I've got a couple of, well, apart from recommendations for seamless socks and undergarments, I've got a couple of phone lines free if you want to join this conversation. Is any of this feasible? Emma responds, no. It has never been okay to strip in the workplace. It was not autistic behaviour. It was gross, entitled male behaviour. The only inch I will give is that a lot of the time we will hyper-mould ourselves to the environment around us. So is Wallace saying that the BBC is institutionally misogynistic? And this is sweet. Mum brought round my knife and fork from my childhood last week. I was so happy. I've never found a better pair of utensils. Joe's in Durham. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hello. First of all, I'd like to say that we are not all a little bit on the spectrum.
No, I accept that, and I apologise.
Thank you. Just to explain that other people may have the odd trait. They don't have the combination of traits that we have.
Yes. Why is it... And this is a question of curiosity. Why is it problematic to say that?
Because it minimises our lived experience.
Yes.
You know, the way someone says, "Oh, we're all a bit on the spectrum," it's very flippant. And it's very dismissive. And yet people say it from a point, well, some people would say it from a point of allyship, in that you were trying to demystify the condition and just portray it as something that is an extreme version of stuff that everybody can understand. But it's not that at all. So it's a phrase I'll never use again. Thank you for that. Thank you.
No, thank you.
May I go on to say there's also a difference between social rules and social cues.
Yes.
And most autistic people will tell you that they stick to social rules, e.g. not dropping your trousers in public,
yes,
rigidly. Social cues are a totally different thing. Social cues are going into a crowded room and not knowing how to respond to somebody who says hello.
Yes.
That sort of thing. But if I go to a friend for coffee, I go for 3/4 of an hour because I don't know any of the cues to tell me to leave.
So you set an internal alarm almost?
Absolutely. And then I know I'm not outstaying my welcome.
Oh, gosh. So when you know, if you were round at mine for dinner and I went upstairs and put my pyjamas on, you wouldn't think that was a sign that it was time for you to go home, necessarily?
I think you were just probably trying to be comfortable in your own home.
No, I hear you. That's a really interesting example, actually. So you have to. Is that masking then? When you do things like that, you set an alarm in your head to go home because you're not going to spot the cues from other people.
Yeah, and it's again this trying to fit in with other people. So, and by the way, I also cut all the labels off all of my clothes
because the way they make you feel is unbearable.
They itch, they sting, they poke you. It's awful.
You poor thing.
But then again, I don't buy clothes that I know I couldn't take the label off or that don't feel right to me. So again, no excuse for dropping your trousers in public. It's not a social cue, it's a social rule. You can't reach
50 years of age unaware that showing your genitals to somebody who hasn't asked to see them is absolutely verboten and taboo.
No, of course not. No. Even if you are autistic, and I'm 66 and I've never done that.
No.
So, and I have 4 children, 3 of whom are autistic, and funnily enough, they've never done it either.
No, funnily enough. It must be tiring. Is that the right word to use or not?
It's exhausting.
Yes.
It's draining. I'll give you a quick example. I was in hospital recently. I asked to have the curtains drawn. They wouldn't let me. Bright lights, lots of extra noise, 6 people in the ward, people shuffling about. I ended up having to communicate by phone, text to the staff because I got to the point where I actually couldn't speak. That's how overwhelming it can be.
You paint a powerful picture, and thank you for the polite lesson in language as well, Joe. I'm very grateful for that, and it's something I won't forget. It's a bit like saying everyone's a little bit OCD, isn't it? And then you meet someone with an obsessive-compulsive disorder diagnosis, and you realise how completely different it is to wanting to alphabetise your record collection or something.
Very different. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you for talking to me. It's coming up to 11:30. I don't know why I find this so moving, but Gary has lived it. I memorised the entire script of Life of Brian in an attempt to fit in with humour when I was in school. I don't doubt that this Gregg character is on the spectrum, but blaming autism for his behaviour is obnoxious in the extreme, as it colours the overall view that the neurotypical world has of neurodivergent people. There will now be a segment of the neurotypical population who use this excuse as a blanket view of the neurodiverse population, and a large number of neurodiverse people getting in touch with me. Mike, I think, speaks for all of you when he writes, "Oh God, it's so goddamn tiring. It must be utterly exhausting." I don't know if this is relevant. I mean, I don't know if you want to ring in and talk about this, but not knowing why things are funny to a neurotypical person like me is just fascinating. The science of trying to work out why a certain word in a certain sentence is funnier than another word. I find it utterly fascinating. One of the funniest men alive, Stuart Lee, I saw on stage at the Royal Festival Hall on Saturday. He's on tour all year, so you should... And he goes meta. He starts analysing his comedy while he's doing his comedy. But that is neurotypical behaviour, because you get it, you know what funny is. To approach it from not even really understanding what funny is or why people what that must just be utterly alienating. I can't imagine how tiring that would be. And then thinking, well, everyone's laughing at that, so I'll learn it off by heart. Oh man, that's what that is just so powerful. 31 minutes after 11 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. It's funny, isn't it? It seems to have passed a bit, I suppose, with Donald Trump threatening to take away the citizenship of American comedians that he doesn't like. The conversations about wokeness and cancellations feel almost like a source of nostalgia. Back when they were largely exaggerated, all of these people with incredibly successful careers and multi-million-dollar Netflix specials banging on about how they weren't allowed to say anything or their careers had been compromised. You can always be nostalgic for that era. But I like conversations about what other people feel about the words that we use. I like being told that you shouldn't say that because of this, or that this is unhelpful even when you think it's helpful. That's what education feels like. That's what illumination feels like. Another one, actually, is a phrase I only came across relatively recently. This is from Carolyn. I forgot. Yes, rules are important. And she uses the phrase neuro-spicy instead of neurodiverse, which some neurodiverse people don't like. So I don't use that phrase either, but I don't criticise you for using it when you're talking about yourself. It's just a phrase I don't think I should use to talk about you, because you might not like it. Oh, we'll be here all day. And also, one or two of you questioning my description of myself as neurotypical. And I believe, display traits of ADHD or something similar to that. But in the context of this conversation about autism, I am not. I'm categorically not on the spectrum, and therefore do not know anything about issues like hypersensitivity, particularly in relation to clothing, and indeed not understanding social cues. It's very different from not being very sociable. That message from Chris was heartbreaking, wasn't it? The idea that he will simply avoid people, he will avoid company, rather than loneliness being preferable to rejection. That's a heartbreaking phrase. I know you don't want my pity and you're not getting it, but I have sympathy in spades for a situation as you describe it like that. And I have another message from Chris as well, which I think I'll read out shortly. But the conversation continues. Gregg Wallace, television presenter. Over half of the allegations against him have been substantiated. His sacking from the television programme MasterChef was confirmed last week. It is, well established that his behaviour made people uncomfortable. In the context of, it's not just showbiz, by the way, it is the difference between a junior member of staff and a senior member of staff doing something that makes you uncomfortable. If it's a senior member of staff, if they are senior to you, you are, I would argue, measurably less likely to complain about it than if it's a junior member of staff, if it's someone who is inferior to you. Most of us, perhaps, would be a little embarrassed to complain full stop. But if it's someone who has power over you, then the likelihood of complaining diminishes accordingly. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. But and therefore, not knowing that people were uncomfortable with what you were doing, what you were saying, or not understanding that what you were doing was inappropriate or wrong is something that is attendant to an autism diagnosis. It is attendant on having a diagnosis with autism spectrum disorder. But that's not the question, is it? The question is how you feel as someone in a similar situation to Gregg Wallace's decision to bring it into play in the context of these criticisms and allegations and indeed findings now. Lewis is in Guildford. Lewis, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
So I'm ADHD autistic, diagnosed in my mid-20s, and it explained a lot of my previous life. Yes. And a lot of the issues I got into growing up at school, etc. I do empathise with Gregg. I myself know, some of these allegations. I understand they're not right, but I also empathise with him because I know a lot of people who are lower functioning than I am who struggle with the same or have been advised that they're inappropriate, for doing the same things as what Gregg has done. And these people are fantastic people who I've got on with, for pretty much my whole life. And still to this day, they will not understand that is inappropriate behaviour. So,
but would they continue to do it after they've been told that it's inappropriate behaviour?
Yes, yeah, they would.
Because they can't join the dots, as it were. Absolutely,
yeah. And that's the thing, the joining the dots. It's, at that time they'll show, they'll be apologetic. It would look like they'll understand at the time. And then the next occasion comes along and, you'll say to them, well, you've already been told about that. We discussed that with you. So my concern really is that I'm not in Gregg's head. I'm not in these people's heads. I don't really know how they're feeling exactly. But my concern is from personal point of view that, sometimes I don't think people do understand that it is wrong.
Yeah, language and jokes, in quotes.
Yeah.
I would agree with you. I can't really disagree with you because you're describing your authentic position. But
absolutely.
But some of the behaviour that we're reading about is predatory.
Yeah, and like I said, James, I agree. Yeah. Myself, I agree. I understand that that's wrong. I know probably the majority of people do understand that's wrong, and like you say, predatory.
Nobody doesn't understand.
Absolutely.
That exposing your genitals to somebody who hasn't asked to see them is wrong.
Yeah, one of your previous callers, I forgot his name, but he mentioned the line, and to us how kind of coming close to that line is found hilarious, and then if you just step over that line, then it's you get told off, or that's wrong, and I think maybe that's where Gregg is. I don't know. I don't know Gregg. I don't know. I'm not in his head, like I said. No, and I disagree vehemently. I disagree with what he's done.
But you have a better understanding of it than you would do if you weren't autistic.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of trouble previously, James. I work in public services. I have inspectors above me. I have, sergeants above me, etc. And I get in trouble for speaking to them in a way that I shouldn't. But
in what way? I don't want to pry. I don't want you to say anything that you're not comfortable saying. But what do you mean? What do you mean when you say speaking to them in a way that I shouldn't?
So, if without going into detail of my job, if I take a job and I feel like that job should be dealt with in a certain way, given my experience, given my training, and I can back that up with a rationale.
Yeah.
If someone then comes back to me and says, no, you've done that wrong, you know, you need to do it this way,
yes.
I will argue my case until I'm sacked. And that is not something that I've ever been able to change. In my previous roles, I've lost my job. And I do understand I need to compromise. Even if I think I'm right, I understand that I should just, you know, butt a bit. Yeah. However, I can't. Physically, I can't. And I tend to get myself in trouble that way. Fortunately, my new employees are, you know, they're a lot more understanding of neurodiversities. So I'm in a bit of a better place and I do understand. But yeah, I empathise with everyone. I do.
I hear you. And that idea of I'd argue until I get sacked. That's again, it's quite poignant because it must be a bit like watching yourself from the outside, knowing that you're on a path, a destructive path, but knowing also that you can't get yourself off it.
That's spot on.
Wow. Thank you, mate. That's been really, really helpful to me. And of course, it does change the nature of the conversation slightly in that his autism is highly likely, and indeed the investigators noted that it is highly relevant, particularly in understanding his difficulty reading social cues, but not, as that earlier caller brilliantly explained, social rules. Social rules you don't need to understand. You just need to be aware of what they are, and then you will not break them. I didn't think that Idiot's Corner would be busy this hour, but Mike's been in touch from Harrogate. In 50 years, he writes, ADHD and the rest of the neurodiverse rubbish will be discredited as treatment for hysteria, electric shock therapy and lobotomies. As ever, writes Mike, there is no balance. Well, there you go, Mike. We've now balanced out informed, intelligent people with experience, and we've balanced them out with you. So everybody's happy. Jed's in Kingston. Jed, what would you like to say?
Hi. I'm not actually diagnosed with autism myself, but I have a mid-20s son who is. And he was diagnosed when he was 3. So actually, we've been very lucky, you know, to have support and help throughout his whole life. But many of the things I recognise here from people that I know are autistic or have children that are autistic. And the thing that really worries me is the fact that it'll give me another, people can now say, I'm autistic, I'm allowed to get away with it. Because these people have so many challenges in their life anyway. It's just another one that will get added to it, I think. And that's the thing that really worries me. You know, I mean, as you probably know...
Another stigma.
Well, yeah, and the degrees of autism are so massive. You know, the way people can cope with life and challenges. It's an enormous.
This is just another burden, is that they now have to carry the weight of Gregg Wallace's offences as well.
Yes, yeah. Well, I certainly say that the people that I know with autism, you know, they may be inappropriate, but the rules thing is right. Most of them, have been brought up with to understand that. There are things you can and can't do, and I know that's not the case can be the case for everyone.
No, you've made a really good case. Why, if you don't mind me asking, why did you seek a diagnosis when he was 3?
Because he didn't seem to get on with other children in group. The usual things, he's a bit of a loner.
I don't know the usual things. I may know some of them, but presume I don't. Just to help.
Okay, well, you have the children's groups after you have young children. He was very happy to play on his own with the toys rather than interact with people.
Right.
And it was a long time ago now, but, we saw some signs and we, went to our local health service and we were very lucky. He got diagnosed very young and therefore had support through school and actually went to an autistic secondary school, which was fantastic. So, he's got exams and he's working and so many of these things which for some children aren't possible. So we're really grateful. But it's challenging, and even now he'll say to me, "Oh, Dad, you're being sarcastic, aren't you?" when I make some jokes. He doesn't understand the joke, but he understands I'm being sarcastic.
So it's almost like being, I don't know, I can't think of an analogy or a comparison, so he can recognise it but not feel it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and unfortunately...
And you learn to recognise it. So the same would be true of social rules, wouldn't it? Is that I don't know why I'm not supposed to do that, but I know I'm not supposed to do it.
Yes, and I mean, I'm sure with every diverse challenges that people have, there will be some that maybe can't recognise those. But when you look at what Gregg Wallace has done, I mean, he's obviously not unintelligent. He's had a career. He's worked for a massive corporation. He's been on telly for years. It seems very. I mean, the problem could be that he wasn't told 10 years ago not to do this.
Well, and of course, even if you had an inkling that what you were doing was wrong, the fact that it has been permitted to continue in this way could be evidence that somehow it's not. If you don't understand, some of the stuff is predatory. We need to be absolutely clear about that. But some of it is not. And you can have different answers to two questions, can't you? And no one would use autism as an excuse or even an explanation for predatory behaviour. But for a lot of the other stuff in this report, then you would, I think. And that's why investigators concluded it was highly relevant. Top dadding there, I think we can agree from Jed. Really love for your son shining out from your call. The time now is 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12, thinking about being the dad of a parent of an autistic child, and the challenges that you never had to face yourself as a child, and what you've learned as a consequence of your child's diagnosis. Because not recognising things that the rest of us don't think need explaining. The difference between a friend and a bully. So someone trying to get you into trouble, or someone, using your inability to recognise behaviours or cues as a source of mischief or unpleasantness. There's so much here, which is why so many people are so upset about Gregg Wallace and his deployment of autism. Because, of course, it wasn't just saying autism was the reason behind some of his behaviours. It was also insulting some of the people that had brought allegations against him, claiming it was all middle-class women of a certain age, which is a nasty thing to say. And yet, I don't know. I don't know where the empathy ends and the understanding begins, except in the context of the difference between social cues and social rules, the knowledge that you don't there's certain things you just don't do. In fact, you kind of argue that if he didn't do it on telly, then he knew it wasn't something that you do in public. As you're doing it in private but not doing it on telly, then you know on some level that it is unacceptable. 11:51 is the time. But it's really people with autism spectrum disorder that are most interesting in this conversation. Mike in Harrogate, who doesn't believe in it, notwithstanding, I'm much more interested in how you feel about, A, the deployment of the condition in the context of defence or explanation, but also the line, where that line is between plausible and implausible explanation, because the investigators found the diagnosis highly relevant to his difficulty in reading social cues or his use of humour as a masking technique. The rest of us perhaps need a little bit of help understanding that. Indeed, both of those things, the difficulty in reading social cues and the use of humour as a masking technique, and how you know where the line is between those things and the stuff that is obviously, and I mean, you can see from space that it's unacceptable behaviour. Anne's in Kingston. Anne, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello. My son, who is now 17, has ASD and high-functioning autism and dyslexia and other difficulties. And my husband has undiagnosed, and I am on the high-functioning spectrum. And like the previous callers indicated, it is a constant struggle. It is exhausting, painful, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The problem is the gentleman's behavior is unacceptable, exposing yourself. Yes. But the inability to understand the social cues is the key. And then it is like allergies. You may have hay fever, or you may have a nut allergy that can kill you. So when we are talking about ASD, we are talking about a huge spectrum of people with different difficulties. Yeah. And I think so far every single caller has presented a different aspect of this.
That's very true.
And the problem is the extra sensitivity. Physically, it is painful. So the clothing, the food, every single thing, the lights, the noise, other people around you. Everything is a struggle every moment of your life, and it is beyond exhaustion. It doesn't mean you cannot be a professional. It doesn't mean you can't be successful in life. However, the boys are more prone to acting out. And as I said, it's a spectrum. So there may be people who sort of absorb, archive, and understand, instead of having that sort of natural ability to read social cues. For example, most girls, what they do is they absorb and they form an archive of appropriate responses or behavior, yes. And then they sort of pull it out, like pulling out a book from the library, and use it next time that thing happens. With boys, it seems to be more difficult. They don't recognize. And had Gregg Wallace been a 13, 14-year-old lad, I could understand him not understanding pulling your trousers down is not appropriate behavior. But for a 52-year-old, I don't think he definitely crossed the line.
Well, there's one case where the presenter opened the door of his dressing room and he had covered his genitals with a sock. I can just about understand how he wouldn't have realised that was unacceptable, because I think there's a rock band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers who appeared on their album covers similarly dressed. So, I wouldn't think it was acceptable behaviour. And I don't want to move into the realms of being patronising, but some of it you can see how perhaps the dots have not been joined, and some of it you think is utterly unforgivable, utterly unacceptable.
I think also there's a factor where you are and which environment you're in. So for in a creative environment, perhaps the lines are defined differently from my profession, which is the legal profession.
And there's a power dynamic as well. Isn't there?
Absolutely. And the other thing is there are rules. The autistic people understand rules because they are written in black and white. What they don't get is the social context. And that's when they run into problems. And a great amount of bullying starts when the children start secondary school, because they are sort of okay during the primary school.
Right.
And once they start secondary school, all that social interaction becomes hyper important. And then that's when they start getting bullied. That's when they start feeling isolated, because they will be isolated. People turn their backs each time. They may listen to you once, twice, but the third time you do something rather, you cross the line, making a joke and so on, they will turn and leave you.
Yes.
There's a line here.
Sorry.
Not at all. And one of your callers very defined it really well. He said, I don't go to social gatherings anymore.
Yeah.
And the other lady, she was wonderful explaining her difficulties at the hospital, or that she would put a timer on for her social visits, knowing that she misses the cue, she will act on. And some of the people on the spectrum may not have developed these strategies. But it does come with life and as you mature. But for some, unfortunately, it may not.
That's a very generous reading of it. And I mean, for people like Jack can we stop trying to excuse Gregg Wallace through the lens of neurodiversity? This is so frustrating. I don't think we are we? We're simply explaining what a spectrum is, and that there are some behaviours that you could chalk up as a consequence of this of autism, and some behaviours which you can't.
Indeed. So there are lines which not to be crossed, but we need to understand there's some truth in the report that his autism played into...
Well, the investigators have found that. They found that it's highly relevant. And I think most autistic people listening to this, if not all, have nodded along with that. That has resonated with them, because Emma perhaps puts it best. Every autistic is different, but every autistic knows the crashing sound of conviviality abruptly cut short by your contribution, which is what Anne was just talking about. Sometimes it could be that your joke in quotes was horribly inappropriate, but sometimes it could just be that it was just wrong. It was dissonant. It wasn't funny. But that's, again, I keep using the phrase heartbreaking. I hope that doesn't sound patronising. That phrase there, the crashing sound of conviviality abruptly cut short by your contribution. That kind of sense of just really wanting to be part of the crowd, trying really hard to fit in and join in, and failing, missing, crashing. Thank you for that. Thank you to everybody that hour. It's incredibly informative, although Anastasia's been in touch to say neurodivergence is nonsense. So thank you for that. It is coming up to 12 noon. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got another mystery for you in the next hour, or at least another area of poor understanding on my part. Ed Miliband is talking about the British way of life coming to an end. And he is, don't worry, he's not talking about immigration. There's plenty of other politicians who make that claim with no justification whatsoever. He's talking about the weather. And this comes as the Met warn that the UK's new normal is extreme weather. So something rather profound is changing. What?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Have we ever had a phone-in about the weather? I know that we've done... I quite like when it's really, really hot. I quite like trying to work out who's got the worst job. I do this, don't I? When I see a show I really like. It was Nye Bevan on Friday. I'd seen Michael Sheen play Nye Bevan at the National on Thursday night, so I couldn't stop talking about that on Friday's show. And now I'm talking about Stuart Lee all the flipping time, because I saw him on Saturday night, and it was brilliant. He could have been a contender for that, who's got the worst job in this weather, albeit that being a stand-up comedian isn't usually the kind of job that you'd put on a list of worst imaginable jobs. He dresses up in the second half of his newish show, as a werewolf in full, costume, a really heavy, big costume. Obviously, the Royal Festival Hall is air-conditioned, but I'm not sure all the venues he's playing at would be quite as chill. So that reminded me of the young lady that I saw at Waterloo Station on Friday morning that I told you about, who, you know, when you walk past someone and you think there's something not right there, your subconscious tells you that something weird is happening, and you can't, so you look back again, and she was in a full cartoon character costume, but she'd taken her head off. So she was sitting there having a sandwich with from the neck down, she was like Yogi Bear or somebody like that. But from the neck up, she was just a perfectly normal young woman. So my subconscious had clocked the fact. So I thought to myself, good Lord, you wouldn't want to be doing that today, would you? I mean, to be fair, you probably wouldn't want to be doing that many days. But today, absolutely shocking. So that's the nearest we've ever come. But we've had conversations about the environment, of course. We've tracked the difficulty of conveying the proper sense of urgency, if you like. Why the central premise of that rather splendid Leonardo DiCaprio film, Don't Look Up, was so compelling. The idea that we as a species would rather look away. There's a very big difference between ignoring imminent peril and denying imminent peril, which is politically still quite popular. Plenty of people who won't tell you who funds them, but who are, spoiler alert, funded by fossil fuel companies, putting immense amounts of effort into denying climate change. And when that ship sailed, trying to undermine or reject drives towards net zero, very successful. They dominate public discourse in some ways in some countries, notably countries where Rupert Murdoch has a stranglehold upon public discourse. But that could just be a coincidence, of course. And it is in the context of net zero that Ed Miliband will speak today, calling out politicians who reject it for betraying future generations. He's describing it as an exercise in radical truth-telling. And inevitably, it's Farage's lot who are even questioning the science behind climate change, while the Conservatives confine themselves, for the time being at least, simply to ditching environmental targets. He wants to make a State of the Climate address. Indeed, he will make a State of the Climate address today in the House of Commons, focusing on a Met Office-led report published today that shows the UK is already facing extreme weather and its effects, and that this is the... dreadful phrase, but occasionally it fits. This is the new normal. We are living in a notably different climate from what it was just a few decades ago. It doesn't mean that the heat wave of 1976 didn't happen. It simply means that it will cease to be as freakish moving forward as it was back then. We have very many more very hot days, fewer extremely cold nights. Global warming caused by the vast emissions of greenhouse gases that our civilization creates is reshaping this country's climate. And in some ways, we can be grateful that the reshaping is relatively low level, and for the time being at least, huge swathes of this country are unlikely to disappear beneath the waves. But we will see more storms, we will see more flooding, and we will see pretty hefty impacts on the natural world, with some species suffering. It looks at 2024. We had our second warmest February, our warmest May, our warmest spring, our fifth warmest December, and our fifth warmest winter since records began in 1884. So we will have to change. And I want to know how. So this isn't a conversation about environmentalism. This isn't well, maybe it is actually. It's you can decide what it's a conversation about, isn't it? All you have to do is ring in, and there you go. You make a meaningful contribution to what this conversation will actually be about. But what I'm drawn to two things. The first is how much would the weather have to change? And I'm not talking about the freaks and weirdos now. I'm talking, well, maybe I am a freak and a weirdo, but I wonder how much the weather would have to change for everybody to join one of the activist groups that like to bring traffic to a standstill in order to just stop oil, or how bad would it have to be? I don't mean the people who deny the science. I mean the people who know that the science is true, but kind of find themselves thinking, oh, something will come up. We're human beings. We put a man on the moon. I've got a horrible feeling. This is my subconscious position, in that I can appreciate all of the alarmism surrounding the environment, and I share proper fears for the future. And I'm going to dress it up as being a little bit nicer than it is. I want to dress it up as my faith in humanity. How can you have faith in humanity looking at the state of the world today? But you do, and faith in science. And we've put a man on the moon. Look at the advances we've made. We're going to be able to deal with the climate crisis. We'll be able to come up with... deep down inside, I don't know whether that's a cop-out or whether that is a genuine, heartfelt position, whether it's like a comforting lie that I tell myself, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine, human beings will come up with something, or whether it is actually something innate. It's an evolutionary defense mechanism. I'm not going to spend my life in a state of panic and fear over the environment, as some people do, because deep down, I believe that human beings will come up with an answer or a solution to the climate crisis. But that's not what our phone-in is about today. I'm not quite sure what it is about, but that's okay, because it's only 12:10. And officially, I've got until at least 12:15 to come up with a question, and unofficially, sometimes I take up to 20 past. So don't worry yet. We are living in a country where extreme weather has become the new normal. What does that mean? 0345 6060 973. One of the things I've discovered over the years is that a lot of people listen to this programme who know a lot more than I do about matters environmental. In fact, you can scratch the word environmental from that observation. A lot of people who listen to this programme know a lot more than I do about matters, and indeed about matter. But we're not talking about matter today, we're talking about matters, and we're talking about matters environmental. I'm looking at... Tony says, I didn't realise, but that's me you've just described, having that weird faith in humanity to come up with a solution to the climate crisis, the nature crisis. Ed Miliband will say today, I feel a deep sense of responsibility to the British people to tell them the truth about what we know about the climate and nature crisis. And that's what I want you to do today. What is the climate and nature crisis? In language that is easy to understand, easy to digest. Explain to me, as Ed Miliband is doing and will do what the truth about the climate and nature crisis is. And he wants it to become an annual statement, an exercise in radical truth-telling about the state of the climate and nature. I want you to tell me in easily digestible language, in terms that aren't dripping with opaque statistics, what the climate and nature crisis contained within the news that we now have extreme weather as our new normal actually is. What will it mean? Scare me. 0345 6060 973. Don't just ring in and shout boo, because I won't even hear you. That'll just be Elliot and Rebecca who get scared. What would you use if indeed we decide that scaring is the correct tactic to use? And I know, Tony, that's the problem right there. You're hoping someone else will deal with it. But that's true of lots of things, not just the climate. There's loads of things I don't think I should have to deal with myself. It's not my role. My role is to talk about it and to invite you to ring in and chip in, Tony. So feel free. But what is the crisis in terms of... so, you see there's floods in Spain at the moment. Are we going to get that here? What will be the things that you will be able to point at and say, I told you so, I warned you about this, and you ignored us because you had this deep-rooted faith that the human beings would come up with something special? What is the reality? What is the truth about what we know about the climate and nature crisis? Because of all the media failures in this country, in this world, on this planet at the moment, this is probably the biggest. And I am part of the problem, not part of the solution. You're looking at heat waves, but then part of me thinks that's nice. You're looking at floods. No one thinks that's nice, but you kind of find yourself thinking intense rain, we'll get used to that, we'll deal with it. The UK is already very much affected by the climate crisis, and I want you to tell me what that actually means. So Ed Miliband believes there is a profound need for an exercise in radical truth-telling, and I don't know what the truth is he feels the need to tell. I'll listen to his speech later. I'll know more by the end of it than I do now, but it strikes me that he's not the most informed environmentalist in the country. The most informed environmentalist in the country might be listening to this programme at the moment. So you can do it. We can do our own version early. We can have an exercise in radical truth-telling about the state of the climate and nature. And the only qualification you need to contribute to this part of the programme is that you know more about it than I do, which, spoiler alert, is not that difficult. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And I mean, I always have a little subtext question here as well, which is why some people are so much more alive to it than others. Why do I not feel the fear that you feel? Is it because I'm not as informed as you? Well, you can fix that on 0345 6060 973. Or is it just something to do with the way that I'm made, my emotional construction? I genuinely don't know, but I do know this. There will be lots of people listening to this who are as qualified as Ed Miliband to provide an annual statement in radical truth-telling about the state of the climate and nature. And that's what I want you to do now. Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes after 12. I don't know that today's a day for the psychology of it, the kind of weird... I mean, is there any other science? Vaccines, actually, come to think of it. That was a contender for our conversation today because there's been a death from measles in Liverpool, and it turns out that only 1 in 4 children in some age ranges are actually vaccinated. This is a hangover of all the lies and nonsense that was spouted during the COVID... Well, the COVID crisis, of course, isn't over. It's an ongoing thing. But during the worst of the pre-vaccine periods of the COVID crisis and the immediate introduction, measles surge, fears for summer holidays after child dies amid low jab uptake is the front page on the eye. So I'm trying to think of other areas where people who have absolutely no knowledge claim to know more than the people with all the knowledge. So I'd give you vaccines, Brexit, and the environment. That's quite a hat trick, isn't it? You think of anyone who's in all three of those camps, Brexit, I know more than the economists do. Vaccines, I know more than the virologists do. And the environment, I know more than the scientists do. Yeah, I can think of a few as well. Rick's in Manchester to tell us something we don't know. Go on, Rick.
Hi, James.
Hello.
Long-time listener. I've got through to you on Mystery Hour once, but long-time fanboy, so...
Thank you very much, mate. That's a lovely thing to say.
Thank you. I work in the field within asset management on the railway, particularly to do with drainage and vegetation management.
Okay.
So an awful lot of the work that we do is to protect earthworks from extreme rainfall. The danger with earthworks is when they get overly saturated, the strength, the ability to hold itself up diminishes, and so it can lead to landslides.
Okay, that's on the list, landslides. And I mean, in a way, you've done a better job of introducing this phone in than I did, and I took 16 minutes to do it. It's things you know because of what you do that the rest of us might not be aware of, and that is very much in the category of what Ed Miliband describes as a sort of radical exercise in truth-telling, and it is something that you come across as a consequence of your work. Not inevitable, though. I mean, your job is to stop it from happening.
Yeah. So we've got a wide range of people at work within like the engineering, mechanical, civil engineering that work with this. But I mean, some of the things that as an industry we've done, first became aware of the really extreme storms I started my career off actually in something called hydraulic modelling.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, so it's effectively where you design drainage and sewer systems to cope for usage and rainfall. So when we first started, about 25 years ago, we're measuring storms as expressed as 1 in 5, 1 in 10, 1 in 25, etc. And the rule of thumb is it's a storm of intensity, but you'd only see every 1 in 5 years or 1 in 10 years, etc. Now, since Cockermouth in 2008, and then we had Carlisle and 2015 with Storm Desmond. Yeah, they're coming much more often. We had Storm Christoph, which caused a huge amount of damage in the northwest in 2021. So, they are becoming more extreme. Effectively, if you heat up an atmosphere, it'll hold more water. The Earth is increasing in temperature. Well, basically close all the doors in your bathroom and put the shower on hot, and you'll see how much it holds water.
That makes sense. So, in the context of landslides, just to take you back if I can.
Yeah.
And if we're going to be flippant about it, I'd quite like to make a list, and so anybody listening who can tell us how their job has given them an insight into something that the rest of us won't be aware of can ring in and go on the list. But on a more serious note, do we need lots more of you? Do we need more and more people? Because you can't check all the tracks all the time. How often reasonably should we be checking for vulnerability to landslide in the event of very, very heavy rain?
Well, I mean, more staff helps. Certainly with response helps. What we tend to do is invest more often. So we'll try and look at where we've got vulnerabilities and make investments there and make sure that we manage it properly. So there's a process that they brought in about 15 years ago where we'd have weather coming in from the Met Office. So our control system would note that we'd have all our various members of the team across a particular area. We'd discuss what was coming in and we'd prepare accordingly. So sometimes we'd put on speed restrictions, etc., but we'd make sure we'd try and deploy the right staff.
Got it.
Of course, the more it happens and the more often it's disrupted, that means staff's not going to pre-planned maintenance work, etc., and you're reacting more, and of course resources go down. So that's a way in which it would change.
And if there was a really, really, really heavy storm next month, forgive me if this is a stupid question, on a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised would you be if there was some sort of landslide involving a railway line?
Well, we're working on the basis that we might well see something like that, but we'd mitigate in terms of if we see something coming in. Like there's a couple of types of storms you see. So probably the most dangerous ones are what you'd call a convective rainfall.
Right.
Which tends to be typical in this sort of weather, where you suddenly get an increase in moisture in a very, very short space of time, and the intensity comes down an awful lot higher in a much smaller space. So that invariably does lead to a landslide.
Well, thank you for what you do. Just also, what about really, really hot weather on like rails, metal rails and stuff like that?
Yes.
Does that do anything as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a metallic infrastructure, so it tends to expand and contract more. So the higher the temperature, the more likely you are to get tracks buckling.
Great. Thanks for that, Rick. Have a great day. Buckling tracks and landslides. Anything else? 0345 6060 973. Brendan's been in touch talking about Rick. He says, this guy sounds like exactly the sort of person reform councils will be trying to get rid of. There's a slight problem in your thinking there, Brendan, in that Rick actually exists. And most of the people that reform councils are promising to get rid of, it was reported yesterday, don't exist. I'll provide you with a little bit more detail on that shortly. But hey-ho, on we go. Rebecca is in Brampton. Rebecca, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I had to pick up the phone when you were talking about impact seen over the last few years. I work for the Carbon Literacy Project, and we're working with schools at the minute doing carbon literacy courses. And I held a focus group with teachers looking for impact and ideas and case studies or what have you. And I was absolutely astonished at how many teachers and schools have seen in the last 5 to 10 years, complete changes in temperature, wind speed, rain, everything. Just parts of the playground that never got hot before, they're now having to plant trees to protect. Rain, fields that have never flooded, that now flood every few months because of runoff from streams and rivers that are completely full further up. All those kind of little impacts that add up loads, having a huge knock-on effect to schools, yeah.
And how, I mean, they're not necessarily bad things, though. I mean, flooding is a bad thing, but some of the other stuff that is a sign of extreme weather doesn't land as a negative in people's lives.
Not all the time, no. I mean, it's like hot summer days, isn't it? If it gets warmer, that's fine. But obviously, if you've got early years on a temperature, a base of a kind of concrete, playground or whatever, and it's getting really too hot for them to be outside, then you've got to start thinking about how you mitigate that. So how do you plant trees? What kind of stuff do you put in the playground? How do you, all those things that are just increasing cost as well, really.
And they're doing it. I mean, the stuff you notice is the stuff that you have to address, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah.
Tell me more about the Carbon Literacy Project. You spoke as if I would know exactly what it was. And
you mean you don't?
I know it's a project about literacy involving carbon.
Right. I
don't know what it is.
Yeah, no, we're in sectors across the globe, really, and we we have courses that people take to become carbon literate. And what that means is they can look at, as if you were in a shop and you can talk about the calorie content of items, you can talk about the carbon cost of your actions and activities and things like that. So, look us up online. We're working with loads and loads of different sectors trying to bring awareness and, education.
Lots of people will. What would you like to add to my list? Because I've got landslides and buckling rails. What would you put on this?
I would say, I know it sounds like you say, it's not always that bad, but I would just say a general slow rise in heat and temperatures just does have an effect, knock on day in, day out.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean,
especially in buildings.
It's not as sexy as a landslide, is it?
It is not as sexy as a landslide, but I didn't realise I'd have to compete with landslides when I called.
No one is expecting them to compete with landslides, but the challenge has been laid down. Thank you, Rebecca. Ed Miliband calling for an exercise in radical truth-telling about the state of the climate and nature. And there it is. The relatively low-level stuff that Rebecca points at in, playgrounds and shared spaces, and then the higher level stuff that Rick tells us about as a consequence of his work, landslides. I mean, you remember the floods in Valencia in Spain, and we had a phone in then about whether or not that would be a loud enough wake-up call. But I don't know what the morning after the wake-up call looks like. What is it that you dream of happening? In the context of public policy, net zero would have been a fairly big achievement, but of course Theresa May abandoned it, and other politicians compete over who can adopt the most negative approach to it. It's why Ed Miliband deserves credit, but does it win votes? Actually protecting the planet for future generations? I don't know. Ali is in Kilburn. Ali, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello.
I wanted to shed some light on the health effects of climate change.
Perfect.
And as the weather gets hotter, I guess the least worst condition is heat stroke, which is quite serious and can affect people for the rest of their lives. But more alarmingly, apparently over half of all infectious diseases are made worse by climate change. So as our climate in the northern hemisphere gets increasingly hotter, these diseases move further and further northwards. So we're talking about bacteria moving into our sort of cooler waters as a result of warming. things like, erratic weather conditions causing cholera outbreak.
Yeah, that's on the list.
Dengue is another threat, and also malaria-spreading mosquitoes, which are being seen increasingly in more and more northerly climes. So these are real issues that we are facing in terms of our health.
That's pretty bad stuff. What do you do? Why do you know this? What's your field of expertise?
I'm a climate researcher, though not in the natural science, but the social science, which involves policy, economics, and so on.
What are your biggest enemies?
The lobbyists.
Right. And did you see Kyoto? Did you go and see Kyoto, the play?
Yes, I did. Very interesting. But I think the problem
that sounded a tiny bit dismissive, Ali. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, so I rely on the art more than the science to bring me into the science to help me understand. I thought Kyoto was fascinating on the role of the lobbyists.
No, absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
Sorry. I thought you were being...
No. Sorry.
That's all right. I'm tone policing you, aren't I, on the radio? And I can't even see your face. It's a ridiculous way to behave. So these are people who are paid huge sums of money to make to make the planet less safe.
Just to give you an example, every climate conference, there are increasing number of lobbyists from the fossil fuel lobby. Yeah. And what are these people doing there? And this is the question. What are they doing? And unfortunately, scientists are realizing that we have the wrong people in the room. Yeah. We need to get we've got the science, we've got the technology and the solutions. We need the right people in the room to basically get things going. But unfortunately, the politicians who are in the room negotiating are too prone to the lobbyists.
And the more prone a politician is to the lobbyists, the more likely they are to be opposed to net zero. And I mean, there'll be some financial involvement in that as well. Thank you, Ali. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, Kyoto tells a story of a bloke called Don Perlman, who was like the godfather of the kind of lobbying that Ali describes. Extraordinary, really. And he got into all the rooms where the decisions are made, partly by setting up an organisation that sounded as if it was environmentally motivated, but was in fact dedicated exclusively to advancing the interests of the big fossil fuel companies. It's a magnificent play, and it is a bit like the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. More effective, if you're lucky enough to have seen it. I'll be amazed if it doesn't get filmed. More effective at bringing home some of the messages that Ali knows inside out as a consequence of his work to people who don't operate in that universe. 12:31 is the time. More of your calls after the very latest headlines with Amelia Cox.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:34. I mean, just because it's really interesting, the thing I was just talking about, a guy called Ron Perlman, the lobbyist who essentially founded an NGO called the Climate Council, to stymie UN negotiations designed to address climate change. It was a completely sort of invented organisation. He was the resident expert, despite having no experience whatsoever in this field. And they would hair split on absolutely everything that was going on at UN conferences, climate research conferences, in order to just prolong everything. Because if you've got a tap that's just pouring money into the pockets of fossil fuel companies, then it's worth your while trying to ensure that the flow is not disrupted. That's all. That's it. That's the job. And of course, it's led us to where we are now. And where we are now is a country where extreme weather is the new normal. And our Environment Secretary, Ed Miliband, is launching an annual statement, an exercise in radical truth-telling about the state of the climate and nature. And just off the top of your heads, we've got landslides, buckling rails, heat stroke, cholera, dengue, malaria, all these things that could become commonplace in this country as a consequence of increasing warmth and extreme weather, because of course some things will be apparently at first glance they'll seem to be contradicting the idea of everything getting warmer, like ice sheets getting bigger in the Antarctic, but that's actually as a direct consequence of climate change. I had a self-appointed clever clogs in my inbox a moment ago. It said, because as the first caller explained, you're getting more water in the atmosphere, which will mean more snow. In order to bring the ice caps or the ice sheets back to where they were when they started shrinking in the 1980s, you'd need about 50 years of snowfall at the increased level to get back to previous levels. So we had a couple of years of increased snowfall because of there being more water in the environment, which meant that for 2021 to 2023, the ice sheets actually increased. But you just, ask a scientist, don't ask a radio presenter, it's all there. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Rob's in Swindon. Rob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I want to talk about climate change relating to the globe, the world,
yes,
and how I think that will affect the UK. And I want to talk about specifically desertification, which is where previous land that we were able to grow stuff in turns to desert, and also the lack of water as a result. And of course, what this is doing is, across the globe, is making it virtually impossible for some people to live in areas where they previously could, and therefore getting desperate and therefore looking to move to a different country. So at the present moment, we have immigration into this country as a big political football, and that is as nothing as to compare to what will come. Just pick a figure, 100,000 a week.
When other parts of the world become uninhabitable.
Well, parts of it already are becoming uninhabitable, and more will become uninhabitable, and more people will move north, and of course that includes us.
Well, you think we'll move north?
No, I mean...
No, we are the north.
We might end up moving north, but for the here and now, we are north, and therefore that's what I'm trying to say, is that people will move to us.
You will migrate towards the cooler parts, even as they are getting hotter. They're not going to be as hot as the places that have undergone desertification. What about water shortages?
Well, water shortages, you can look again, either globally or you can look locally. Globally, we're looking at aquifers that are supplying the southern states of America, for example. Some of them have dropped 40 feet because they are simply not able to replenish. They take hundreds, if not thousands of years to replenish. Then on the other hand, we've got rivers like the Nile, which are supplying 8 different countries. And there was already a threat of a war occurring between Egypt and Ethiopia when Ethiopia decided to build the Renaissance Dam. Fortunately, they entered into a contract where Ethiopia agreed that under no circumstances would they take any of Egypt's water. But there are plenty of opportunities in different parts, particularly of the Middle East, where there's only one river that's supplying the whole country with water.
Most dystopias involve wars over water, don't they? Wars over sort of basic human needs. Crikey. It's all going on, Rob. Graham has a very interesting question for you. Would you like to answer it?
I'll try.
He says, if they want us to worry about desertification, why have they given it such a delicious-sounding name?
Because it's... I like desserts myself, and I'm sure most people do.
No, well, it took me a moment, actually, to get that, but it was a very similar sense of humour to mine, actually. I said, Thank you, Rob. Anna is in Frome in Somerset. Anna, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello.
First-time caller.
You're very welcome.
I'm coming from a couple of issues. I can't compete with landslides, sadly.
Dengue fever?
No, but we've got a small holding here, and we produce traditional hay, and we're only one of a few farms that do it.
Oh, yeah.
And we're seeing massive effects each year, the last kind of 2 years particularly, where we're getting completely waterlogged all winter, which we never had. We'd usually get waterlogged by sort of February.
Right.
We're waterlogged in winter. That potentially rots the roots of the grasses and the flowers, the wildflowers.
Yes.
And then come the next sort of growing season, you're just not getting the kind of height of the grasses or the volume. And it was really noticeable the last couple of years. We're seeing more over competition, I think, of weeds. I'm not a botanist, so others will know better on that. But, much more of things like the ragwort, and trying to pull ragwort out of rock-hard ground in the summer is really good fun.
Well, I'll have to take your word for that. It's not something I've got on my to-do list at the moment, but this is, I mean, something that you've been able to see change in real time over a period of years.
Really quick. It's really amazing, actually. And my job is outdoors. I work with dogs, trying to operate businesses where half the time it's too hot to work with them. Yeah. Half the time, the storm's blowing in their faces, and, dogs don't love that like we don't.
No.
They don't focus very well.
I hadn't thought of that. So many things. Anything outdoors is going to be undergoing a profound change, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Just as a side, I was interested listening to a lady who was talking about the carbon literacy. 20-odd years ago, I worked for an energy agency up in the North Scotland, and we were actually doing presentations to schools. Nothing like, obviously, as detailed what that lady's doing, but we were doing these PowerPoints at the time, you'll remember those, which were all about what we're seeing now, these sort of wet, extreme weathers, and then hot weather at the other time of the year. And we were all warned about this, and it's coming to bear.
And we don't know what the alarm would have to sound like in order for more people to sit up and take notice. And I say that as someone who's part of the problem, not part of the solution. Anna, thank you. And you remind me, actually, when you mention water, of a story that I haven't touched on yet today and should have done, forgive me. 10 Palestinians, including 6 children, killed yesterday while collecting water in Gaza. The Israeli military, who were responsible for the deaths, have described it as a malfunction. In fact, they've even said that they, let me get the quote quite right, the IDF regrets any harm to uninvolved civilians, it said in a statement following the killing of 6 children. So now you know. And that was queuing for water that, of course, they have to queue for because the desalination plants cannot operate as a consequence of the fuel shortages that are in place, as a consequence of fuel not being allowed into the territory, which makes people dependent on collection centres where they fill up plastic containers. And a few hours after that, 12 more people were killed by an Israeli strike in a market in Gaza City. And early yesterday morning, a missile hit a house in Gaza City where a family had moved to after receiving an evacuation order from their home. The UK media will dedicate approximately 1/12 of its attention to those stories that it did to events at the Glastonbury Festival a couple of weekends ago. You can make of that what you will, but I apologise for not bringing that to your attention sooner. And speaking of things that Keir Starmer has condemned, which of course includes the events at the Glastonbury Festival a couple of weeks ago, he's said, as far as I'm aware, nothing so far about the bonfires in Northern Ireland at the weekend, which had effigies of refugees on top of them. So I don't know what the rules are for condemnation in the current Downing Street administration. But I do know that Ed Miliband is part of it, and he is due to speak later today about the climate crisis that has made UK's extreme weather the new norm. And we're just looking at what that might mean. And the list is long and getting longer, and we won't have touched half of it, will we? So, you're going to have little things as well, like the earliest ever frog spawn and blackbird nesting that we've ever seen in 2024. This means that species that depend on others, such as for food or pollination, risk getting out of sync. So you could throw all sorts of things into disarray, but you don't know until it happens. And in fact, you don't know what you've got till it's gone.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll do this again. It's working, actually. I struggle to find good ways into environment conversations. You have to guard against the permanently worthy, and I know that's not a fair thing, but I'm good at this. I can do radio. I can't do environment stuff, and the people that can sometimes sound worthy, and that's not good radio, so you need to guard against it. This is a really good way of doing it, just things that are changing and things that will change and things that we should be aware of. Big things and little things. Tessa writes, I live in Norfolk. We've only had a few millimetres of rain here since early March. All the crops that have not been irrigated, i.e. cereal crops, look dreadful. Much of the barley is only about 8 inches tall. Even the maize is wilting and collapsing. So, as we get extreme weather, everything changes. And yet the sense of urgency seems to be lacking. I want to turn your attention now to something rather different. The Joint Committee on Human Rights has responded to the government's latest moves on mandatory reporting. Mandatory reporting involves a duty to report child sex abuse. And the warning that MPs have made is that it could end up having little or no consequence due to a lack of repercussions for those who fail to comply. Jonathan West is the director of Mandate Now, an organisation that has been campaigning for years to have mandatory reporting properly in place, and is best placed to give us a bit of a steer on what this means. So, Jonathan, why bother doing it at all if they're not going to deliver what people like you know is needed?
I think so that they can claim that they've fulfilled the recommendation from the Child Abuse Public Inquiry, ICSA, which reported a couple of years ago, which recommended mandatory reporting. They just want to tick the box.
So it's mandatory reporting in name only, from your point of view, or is that an exaggeration?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably best explained by a tangible example.
Yes.
Just imagine that you work in a children's home. There are teenage girls there, and you know that there are suspicious men hanging around about the place. And every so often you see one of the girls get into a taxi with them, and they disappear for a day or two. You would have thought that that would trigger a duty to report.
Yes.
But it doesn't. If they come back bruised or bad clothing, still doesn't trigger the duty to report. If they have a sexually transmitted disease as a result, still doesn't trigger the duty to report. If they get pregnant, it still doesn't trigger the duty to report. The one thing that would trigger the duty to report would be if they actually come to you and say, I've been raped.
I know a little bit, sorry to interrupt, I know a little bit about this, largely thanks to my conversations with your predecessor at Mandate Now, Tom Perry, and I'm a little bit stunned, frankly, at the inadequacy of what has been put forward. I understand your explanation that they just want to be able to say that they've done something. Will anything improve under the proposals as they stand? Will anything get better?
Almost certainly not. The bill as it stands is a copy of a bill that the Conservatives were going to bring forward last year, but it fell because the general election got in the way. And the Home Office at the time produced an impact assessment report estimating how many additional reports there would be as a result of this. And their estimate was that it would increase reporting, the number of reports, by 0.3%. Wow. In other words, about one report per local authority per year in England.
What would a perfect system look like? Well, I know there's no such thing as perfect, but what would a vastly superior system look like?
Well, we know what that looks like because Britain is actually quite unusual in not having mandatory reporting for child sex abuse. Many other countries have it, and Australia in particular has had it for many years, and we have very good data on its effect. And effectively, if you compare before mandatory reporting to after, you get double or treble the number of children protected.
Wow.
Not 0.3%.
And a word, if you would, on the lack of repercussions for those who fail to comply, because you've described the inadequacies of the early warning system, as it were, but even with that poor system in place, there wouldn't be consequences for people who don't abide by its instructions.
The ICSA public inquiry recommended that it should be a criminal offence not to report child sex abuse, which is what many other countries have. But the bill instead is hoping that people will instead refer non-reporters to the disclosure and barring service.
Right.
Now, the point is that DBS referrals don't happen by magic. They have to be made by people.
Yeah.
Hardly anybody knows how to make a DBS referral. If they're not going to report the abuse in the first place, they're hardly going to report somebody who hasn't made a report. And the only people who would actually have a legal duty to make a DBS referral would be the care home's employers, who are hardly going to, and then only if they sack or move to non-child-facing duties, the non-reporter first. So if they decide to shrug their shoulders and leave the non-reporter where they are, absolutely nothing will happen.
I know that you've offered up the sort of box-ticking explanation, but there are people involved in this process who must know what you know and must know what we now know because you've explained it to us. What are they playing at, Jonathan? What is your theory as to why they don't just adopt the Australian system, as it were, wholesale?
I think that children's services are very short of money.
Yes.
More abused children coming to light means more money spent protecting them.
Is that
and the fact that those children then would not have major health problems, lifelong mental health problems or whatever, that would prevent them taking an active part in society for the rest of their lives, that's a downstream cost that won't that's a downstream benefit that won't happen this part.
And we don't get the long... No, I hear you. Jonathan, thank you. That is a grim testimony, but as ever with yourself and your colleagues at Mandate now, really important insights into why something that should be happening is not happening. It's 12:55. A couple of calls, well, certainly one, maybe two, on the question of what Ed Miliband... I'm not going to say the question of what Ed Miliband is talking about, but that sounds a little bit unfair. Let me change the emphasis. On the question of what Ed Miliband is talking about. You see how important emphasis is? We're having a phone-in. What is Ed Miliband talking about? No, we're having a phone-in about what Ed Miliband is talking about. Chris is in Bristol. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah.
What do you want to put on my list, Chris?
What do I want to put on your list? Aquaculture or fish farms.
Go on.
Okay. So I'm an environmental student doing a one-year placement studying antimicrobial resistance. And there is some bacteria which grow between 22 and 25 degrees centigrade in the water.
Yeah.
And yeah, basically, with that, it causes an outbreak of a thing called furunculosis, which affects salmon and trout.
Right.
With that, basically, it can wipe out up to 30% of aquatic animals.
And that could happen here with the rising temperatures.
That's happening. It's happening now. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, can I be glib for a moment?
Yep.
Other countries that are much hotter than us have native fish populations. I go to Southeast Asia, I'll eat a lot of fish. So will we not just replace with fish that are not susceptible to this microbe?
Well, the thing is, it affects salmon across the globe. So, I mean, North America is where it initially started off.
Yeah, but other fish. I mean, I did warn you I was being glib. We'll just eat other fish that thrive in hotter waters.
You could eat other fish, but then you're replacing one problem with another. So you're looking at transportation of, like other fish and aquatic animals, which is going to then increase your carbon footprint, which is then going to...
Of course it
increase
is.
Temperatures. So.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, it's extraordinary, isn't it, when you start scratching the surface of this, that there are equivalents of you in myriad different sectors, myriad different areas, all tracking change that will be profound and largely negative and going through no fault of your own, largely as a fault of my profession, going largely unnoticed. And this is happening already, and the hotter it gets, the worse it gets.
Well, yeah, it's a seasonal bacterial disease. So obviously ideal temperatures are between 20 to 25 degrees. The more temperature we have in that zone, the more prevalent, the more it's going to spread. And then obviously antimicrobial resistance kicks in because you've got overcrowding and you've then got stress on your fish species.
What on a scale? I mean, this is just a cheeky question to you. What sounds worse, landslides or antimicrobial resistance?
I think they're both just as important as each other, to be fair.
Oh, look, that's a politician's answer, mate. Honestly, you should be ashamed of yourself. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. And speaking of shame, we're out of time now, but something quite interesting happened. And fair play to the Beeb for putting in a Freedom of Information request. Do you remember when Honest Bob Jenrick filmed himself accosting tube goers in an attempt to attack Sadiq Khan. Well, we should have thought. I didn't think of this. I'm going to go upstairs now, and one of my colleagues will say, "No, we did that. We did that. You just ignored it." They put in a Freedom of Information request on how many prosecutions for tube fare evasion are currently underway, because Honest Bob Jenrick suggesting that the authorities had dropped the ball, or that the authorities weren't doing anything. Do you think that tube fare evasion prosecutions are at their highest since 2019, or do you think that Honest Bob Jenrick is a trustworthy guy? Because you can't think both. They are indeed at their highest since 2019, but don't let that stop him from making his little films. That's it from me for today. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on the top stories and opinion. You can put your news category... Sorry, I just got distracted by the knowledge that I have to go and buy a crochet needle, and I haven't worked out... I'm going to try John Lewis, She. Do you think?
Definitely.
Yeah. There we go. You can put your news categories in the order you want. You can pause and rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Ben Kentish is in for Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
That was very honest of you to say that's why you stumbled, because your brain was already out the door.
I was going to ask people to recommend places I could go to get a crochet.
I reckon the life we lead, get yourself to John Lewis and get it sorted.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is it.
Never knowingly undersold and all that. Or as my friend says, their new motto should be, nothing bad ever happens in John Lewis.
Well, do you know where they got that from?
Never knowingly undersold?
No, nothing bad ever happens in John Lewis.
No.
John Betjeman.
Oh, did he say that?
He was asked where he would go in the event of the 4-minute warning.
I did
and
not
he
know
said,
this.
it's slight précis, he said, I would go to the haberdashery department at Peter Jones in Sloane Square because nothing bad ever happens there, or could ever happen.
Well, that
there.
would do the same job if you're in that neck of the woods.
It's exactly the haberdashery department, isn't it?
It is. Perfect.
James O'Brien on LBC.